Hey Dead Signal FM viewers, getting ready for bed? Wishing you a calm and cozy night. Before we start, where are you watching from and what time is it? Let's get started. It was the wallpaper that started it all, that hideous, faded yellow pattern with the small blue flowers that seemed to shift position when I wasn't looking directly at them. My grandmother's house had always been peculiar, but I never expected it would become my prison. Not a physical prison, you understand, but something far worse. I should start by telling you that I'm not crazy. At least, I wasn't before I moved into 743 Sparrow Lane. 3 months ago, I was just Emma Winters, 32, recently divorced, and desperate for affordable housing in this godforsaken economy. When Gran passed away and left me her Victorian monstrosity on the outskirts of Millfield, it seemed like salvation. A house. My own house. No rent. No mortgage. Just property taxes and utilities. I could finally breathe. The funeral had been small. Just me, the minister, and 2 of Gran's bridge club friends. We'd never been particularly close. She was always too stern, too rigid for my chaotic childhood energy. My parents had kept our visits infrequent, and after they died in that car accident when I was 17, the visits became even rarer. Just obligatory holiday check-ins and the occasional Sunday dinner that stretched into uncomfortable silences. The lawyer had seemed surprised when he read the will. So was I. She always said you were special, he told me afterward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. That you could see things clearly, whatever that means. I didn't know what it meant either. Not then. The first night I spent in the house was unremarkable. The air smelled of mothballs and lavender furniture polish. Gran's belongings were everywhere. The crystal figurines on the mantel, the heavy brocade curtains, the faded photographs in ornate frames. I slept in the guest bedroom, unwilling to claim her space so soon. The sheets were crisp and smelled faintly of cedar. I dreamt of nothing. It was on the 3rd day that I noticed the wallpaper. I was cleaning out the study, sorting through decades of paperwork and mementos, when a shaft of late afternoon sunlight hit the wall just right. The pattern seemed to ripple, like wind passing through tall grass. I blinked, attributing it to eye strain and dust particles floating in the sunbeam. But when I looked again, I swear one of those tiny blue flowers had moved half an inch to the left. You need sleep, I muttered to myself, rubbing my eyes, and probably a drink. That night, I woke at 3:17 a.m., not with a start, not from a nightmare. I simply opened my eyes, instantly alert, as if someone had whispered my name. The house was silent except for the typical settling sounds of an old structure. Yet there was something in that silence, a quality I couldn't name, like the silence itself was listening to me. I lay there, heart thudding steadily in my chest, ears straining. There was no reason to be afraid. I was alone in a house I now owned, secure behind locked doors and windows. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. When my alarm went off at 7, I was still awake, still staring at the ceiling. The weeks that followed brought a kind of routine. I had taken a leave of absence from my graphic design job, remote work blessed with flexibility, to sort through Gran's affairs and settle into the house. Each day, I tackled another room, another closet, another drawer full of mysterious keys and newspaper clippings and handwritten notes in Gran's spidery script. It was in the attic that I found the journals. 7 leather-bound books, their pages yellowed and fragile, dating back to the 1940s when my great-grandparents first purchased the house. Most entries were mundane, accounts of dinner parties, community gossip, weather reports, but interspersed were odd entries, written in a different hand, more hurried and jagged. April 17th, 1943. It knows I can hear it now. The scratching has moved from the walls to just behind my ear. Harold says I'm imagining things. Perhaps I am. The doctor has prescribed new pills. June 2nd, 1943 found Millicent staring at the wallpaper in the study again today. When I asked what she was looking at, she said, "The faces between the flowers. I've scheduled another appointment with Dr. Ellis." September 30th, 1943. The house was silent today. Completely silent. No creaking. No settling, like it was holding its breath. Harold didn't notice. No one notices but me. I closed the journal, an uncomfortable prickle walking up my spine. Great-grandmother Millicent had died in 1946 after what the family always referred to as a nervous episode. No one had ever explained what that meant exactly. That night, I heard the scratching for the first time. It came from inside the wall beside my bed. Faint at first, like a mouse or insect might make. I tapped the wall, expecting the sound to stop or change if it was some small creature. Instead, the scratching stopped immediately, then resumed in precisely the same rhythm as before, only slightly louder. Tap, tap, scratch. Pause. Tap, tap, scratch. I placed my palm flat against the wall. The old plaster was cool beneath my hand, but there was something else. A subtle vibration, as if the wall itself was humming very softly. "Hello," I whispered, feeling immediately foolish. What was I expecting? An answer. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient noises of the house, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, seemed to have ceased. Then, faintly, so faintly I might have imagined it, a whisper, not words exactly, more like the sound of breath being drawn through teeth, a soft, sibilant hiss. I jerked my hand away from the wall as if burned. The normal sounds of the house rushed back in. The clock ticking, a branch scraping against the window, the distant rumble of the furnace. I sat there, heart hammering, until dawn broke through the curtains. The next day, I called a pest control service. The technician spent 2 hours inspecting the house, focusing especially on the wall where I'd heard the scratching. "I don't see any signs of rodents or insects," he said finally, folding his equipment away. "The walls are solid plaster over lathe. No hollow spaces where anything could be nesting. House this old, though, you'll get all sorts of noises. Wood expands and contracts. Pipes knock. Nothing to worry about." I paid him and watched him drive away, unconvinced but unwilling to press the issue. What would I say? That I thought my great-grandmother's nervous episode might have been related to whatever was living in the walls? That night, I dreamt of the wallpaper. In my dream, I stood in the study, watching as the blue flowers slowly rotated, revealing tiny faces in the centers of their petals. The faces had no features except for eyes dark, glistening eyes that followed me as I moved around the room. I tried to leave, but the door had disappeared, replaced by more wallpaper, more flowers, more eyes. I woke up sweating, sheets tangled around my legs. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. There was someone standing at the foot of my bed. I froze, not even daring to breathe. The figure was little more than a shadow, a density in the darkness, vaguely human-shaped but somehow wrong in its proportions. Too tall, too thin, its head slightly too large. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized what I was seeing wasn't a solid form at all, but a kind of distortion in the air, like heat rising from pavement on a hot summer day. "Who's there?" I managed to whisper. The shape didn't move or respond. It simply stood there, watching. I somehow knew it was watching, though I couldn't make out any eyes or face. I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand, my fingers closing around the switch. Light flooded the room and the figure was gone, if it had ever been there at all. I didn't go back to sleep. As days passed, the incidents grew more frequent, more difficult to dismiss. The scratching in the walls became a nightly occurrence, moving throughout the house as if following me. Objects would not be where I left them. My coffee cup on a different shelf, my car keys in the refrigerator, my reading glasses folded neatly on top of Gran's old Bible when I was certain I had left them on my desk. Most disturbing were the whispers. They came at odd hours, never when I was expecting them, never clear enough to make out distinct words. Sometimes they seemed to emanate from the heating vents. Other times, they sounded as if someone was standing right behind me, lips nearly brushing my ear. I started keeping a journal, partly to document the events and partly to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind like great-grandmother Millicent apparently had. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. Stress, grief, though I barely knew Gran. The natural adjustment to living alone in an unfamiliar house. Perhaps I was developing some auditory processing disorder. Maybe carbon monoxide was leaking from the ancient furnace. I purchased a carbon monoxide detector. It detected nothing amiss. One evening, about 6 weeks after moving in, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard footsteps overhead. Slow, deliberate steps crossing what would be Gran's old bedroom. I froze, knife poised above the onion I'd been chopping. The steps moved to the hallway, then to the top of the stairs, then one by one down the stairs. Each creak of the old wood was precisely timed, evenly spaced. Whoever, whatever, was descending was in no hurry. I stood paralyzed, knife clutched in my hand. As the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and turned toward the kitchen, they stopped just outside the doorway. Silence. "Hello!" My voice emerged as a croak. "Who's there?" No response, but the air in the doorway seemed to thicken, to congest, like gelatin beginning to set. Without conscious thought, I found myself moving forward, knife still in hand. Some detached part of my mind was screaming at me to run, to get out of the house, but curiosity propelled me forward. I had to know, had to see. The doorway was empty. The hallway beyond was empty, but the air felt wrong. Colder, denser, charged like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "What do you want?" I whispered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the temperature in the hallway plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me, though it was mid-June and the house had been almost uncomfortably warm minutes before. And then I heard it. A woman's voice, aged and frail but clear. "Emma." Just my name, but spoken with such intimacy, such familiarity, that I staggered backward. It wasn't Gran's voice. It was higher, more delicate, with an accent I couldn't place. "Who are you?" I demanded, knife raised though I knew it would be useless against whatever was happening. "You know," the voice whispered, "you've always known. She chose you because you can see." I backed into the kitchen, slamming the door shut and leaning against it, breathing hard. The cold didn't penetrate the closed door, but I could feel it waiting on the other side, patient and ancient. That night, I slept in my car, parked 2 blocks away. I spent the next day researching the history of the house. The local historical society had limited records, but I learned that before my great-grandparents purchased it in 1940, the house had belonged to a Dr. Elias Thorne, who operated a small private sanitarium for nervous disorders out of the property. The sanitarium had closed in 1939 after a scandal involving a patient's death. A young woman who had allegedly thrown herself from the attic window after claiming she was being consumed by something in the walls. The librarian who helped me find these records eyed me curiously. "Are you a relative of the Winters family?" "The resemblance is striking." "My grandmother was Evelyn Winters," I replied. "I recently inherited the house." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Be careful with old houses," she said softly. "They collect things over time, not just dust and memories." I returned to the house that afternoon with both dread and determination. If I was going to understand what was happening, what had apparently been happening in this house for generations, I needed to confront it directly. The house was quiet when I entered, almost welcoming. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm rectangles on the hardwood floors. There was no sign of the previous night's disturbance, no lingering cold spots or whispers. I went directly to the study and stood before the wall with the yellow wallpaper. In the daylight, it looked harmless, faded, old-fashioned, but just wallpaper. The blue flowers were static, arranged in the same repetitive pattern across the entire wall. "I know you're here," I said aloud, feeling both ridiculous and terrified. "I know about Dr. Thorne. I know about the sanitarium. What do you want from me?" Silence answered me. Not even the house's usual creaks and groans responded. I stepped closer to the wall, examining the wallpaper more carefully. Up close, I could see that some of the flowers had tiny imperfections. A missing petal here, a smudged center there. I ran my fingers over the pattern, feeling the slightly raised texture of the ink. My fingertips brushed over a section where the wallpaper seemed to pucker slightly. I pressed harder and felt something give. Not the paper tearing, but something shifting behind it. Heart racing, I fetched a utility knife from the kitchen and carefully cut around the puckered section, creating a small flap about 6 inches square. Peeling it back revealed not the plaster I expected, but a small recess in the wall. Inside was a bundle wrapped in yellowed cloth. My hands trembled as I removed it. The cloth was silk, once white but now discolored with age. I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon, and beneath them, a small leather-bound book different from the journals I'd found in the attic. The topmost letter was addressed to my dearest Lillian and dated September 3rd, 1938. The handwriting was elegant but hurried. They've discovered our correspondence. Dr. Thorne has confined me to the East Room and threatens electroshock if I continue to indulge in fantasies. But what I've seen is no fantasy, my love. The entity that dwells in this house is real. It feeds on suffering, the patient's anguish, their despair. Thorne knows this. He is not treating us, he is harvesting us. I've documented everything in the enclosed journal. If I do not survive what's coming, please ensure these records reach someone who will believe. The entity is growing stronger. Last night, it manifested physically for the first time. A form like rippling darkness, tall and thin, with too many limbs. It stood at the foot of my bed and spoke your name. They come for me now. Remember that I love you, and that what haunts these walls is not human and never was. Forever yours, Catherine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely untie the ribbon around the journal. When I finally managed to open it, I found page after page of detailed observations. Dates, times, descriptions of phenomena disturbingly similar to what I had been experiencing. Catherine, whoever she was, had methodically documented the entity's manifestations, its patterns, its apparent abilities. The final entry read, October 17th, 1938, it knows I'm documenting it. It spoke to me directly tonight using Dr. Thorne's voice, but somehow wrong, layered, as if many voices were speaking in unison. It said only, "We have chosen you." I fear what this means. The scratching is constant now, from every wall, and when I press my ear against the plaster, I can hear whispering, countless voices, pleading, screaming, all beneath a sound like wet cloth tearing. I believe I understand now. The walls aren't solid. They never were. They're permeable membranes between here and somewhere else, and what lives there wants to come through. Someone must have invited it initially, Thorne, with his cruel experiments? Or was it here before, waiting for the right person? Whatever the truth, I cannot stay. Tonight, I go to the attic. The window there offers the only escape I can still control. I closed the journal, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. The infamous suicide from the attic window hadn't been suicide at all. It had been Catherine's desperate attempt to escape whatever was in the house. A floorboard creaked overhead. I froze, journal clutched to my chest. Another creak followed, then another. Footsteps crossing the ceiling directly above me. They moved purposefully toward the hall, toward the stairs. This time, I didn't wait. I stuffed the letters and journal into my bag and ran for the front door. My hand was on the knob when the voice came. Not from behind me, not from the staircase, but from inside my own head. You can't leave, Emma. She chose you, just as Millicent chose Evelyn, just as Catherine should have chosen Lillian. The lineage must continue. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It simply was vast and ancient and hungry. What are you? I whispered, hands still on the doorknob but unable to turn it. I am the space between walls, it replied. The whisper between heartbeats, the shadow between blinks. I have worn many names across many centuries. To Dr. Thorne, I was opportunity. To Catherine, I was terror. To your great-grandmother, I was madness. And what are you to me? I found myself asking, though every instinct screamed at me to flee. The air around me thickened, congealed. I felt it pressing against my skin, seeking entry through my nose, my mouth, my ears. To you, Emma Winters, I am inheritance. The pressure intensified, forcing me to my knees. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. The entity was everywhere, in the air, in the walls, in the very foundations of the house. It was the house, I realized with sudden clarity. The structure itself was merely its physical manifestation, its cocoon. As consciousness began to fade, I had one final, desperate thought. The journal. Catherine had documented everything, the entity's patterns, its manifestations, perhaps even how to fight it. If I could just stay conscious long enough to... Darkness took me. I woke in my bed upstairs, sunlight streaming through the curtains. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed the entire episode. The hidden compartment, Catherine's letters, the entity's voice. Then I noticed the utility knife on my nightstand, and beside it, Catherine's journal, open to a page I hadn't read before. The entry was dated October 16th, 1938. I've discovered something vital. The entity cannot create, it can only manipulate, imitate, and consume. It needs a host, a conduit between its realm and ours. Dr. Thorne has been feeding it for years, offering his patients as vessels. But the perfect vessel, it seems, must be genetically predisposed, sensitive to the veil between worlds. Among Dr. Thorne's notes, I found references to certain bloodlines, certain families with histories of second sight or spiritual sensitivity. The Winters family appears repeatedly. More crucially, I found references to repelling the entity. It abhors certain vibrations, specific frequencies that disrupt its ability to maintain form or influence our realm. I've constructed a device using components from the radio in the common room. If my calculations are correct, it should generate the necessary frequency to temporarily weaken the entity's hold. My heart raced. Had Catherine actually developed a way to fight the entity? I flipped through the remaining pages, but they were blank. Her documentation ended there. Whatever device she had constructed, whatever knowledge she had gained, had died with her. Or had it? I recalled the librarian's words, "Be careful with old houses. They collect things over time." If Catherine had built some kind of device to repel the entity, might it still be somewhere in the house? The attic, perhaps, the last place she had been alive? I dressed quickly and made my way to the attic stairs, Catherine's journal clutched in my hand. The house was unnaturally silent. No creaking floorboards, no ticking clocks, no humming appliances. It was listening, waiting. The attic door stood partially open, though I distinctly remembered closing it after finding the journals weeks earlier. A thin shaft of dusty light spilled onto the landing. As I reached for the doorknob, my fingers brushed against something wet and viscous. I jerked my hand back, finding my fingertips coated with a clear, gelatinous substance that clung like mucus. The substance was seeping from between the door and its frame, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. "No," I whispered, backing away. But even as I retreated, the substance began to flow more rapidly, spilling onto the landing and creeping toward my feet. "Emma," the voice whispered, now from everywhere at once. "Don't resist what you were born for. Your grandmother knew. She protected you as long as she could, but even she had to succumb eventually. The bloodline must serve." "Serve what?" I demanded, still backing down the stairs. "What are you?" Instead of answering, the gelatinous substance surged forward, enveloping my feet before I could move. It was cold, colder than ice, colder than anything I'd ever felt, and where it touched, my skin began to numb instantly. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The substance was crawling up my legs now, and with each inch it advanced, I felt less like myself, more like an empty vessel waiting to be filled. "Your grandmother resisted too," the voice continued conversationally. "She sealed me away, used Catherine's device to weaken me. But such measures are temporary. I am patient. I endure. And now you're here, the next vessel, stronger even than Evelyn. Through you, I will finally be able to extend beyond these walls." The substance had reached my waist, my torso. Couldn't move, could barely think. But one word penetrated my fading consciousness. Device. Catherine's device. Gran had used it. With the last of my strength, I called out. Not a scream for help that no one would hear, but a question to the entity itself. "If I'm so important to you, why kill me? Why not bargain?" The substance paused in its advance, quivering slightly against my chest. "What could you possibly offer me, little vessel?" The voice seemed amused. Freedom, I gasped. You're bound to this house, aren't you? That's why you need vessels, to extend your influence. What if I could help you reach further, affect more than just this property? The substance receded slightly, just enough for me to breathe more easily. Speak carefully, Emma Winters. Deception will bring consequences. No deception, I said, my mind racing. But I need to understand what you are, what you want. If I'm to be your vessel, I deserve to know. The substance withdrew further, forming a puddle at my feet but no longer touching me. Around us, the air shimmered like a heat mirage, gradually coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape, the too tall, too thin figure I had glimpsed at the foot of my bed. I am ancient, it said, its voice clearer now, directed. Before this land had a name, I dwelled between spaces, the gap between heartbeats, the moment between sleeping and waking, the threshold between room and room. I observed your kind, hungered for what you possessed. Physical form, sensation, emotion. You feed on emotions? I asked, slowly edging away from the attic stairs. I consume experience, it corrected. Joy, pain, fear, ecstasy. All are sustenance. For centuries, I was limited to brief tastes, moments when humans cross thresholds with strong emotions. Then Dr. Thorne discovered me. He learned to provide me with subjects in extremis, minds broken by his treatments, ripe with fear and despair. In return, I granted him insights, knowledge beyond his time. And my family? Where do we fit in? The figure tilted its head, an unsettlingly human gesture from something so alien. Sensitivity, perception. Your bloodline can sense the spaces between, can hear me without my exerting great effort. Millicent could see me but feared me. Evelyn recognized my potential but eventually betrayed me, using Catherine's device to weaken and contain me. Though you could be different. You could be partner rather than vessel. I was nearly at the bottom of the stairs now, pulse racing with a desperate plan forming. If Gran had used Catherine's device, if it still existed somewhere in the house, what would such a partnership entail? I asked, playing for time. The figure flowed down the stairs like liquid, reforming in front of me on the landing. I would share this house with you. Through you, I could experience the world beyond these walls. See through your eyes, feel through your skin. In return, you would know things no human has known, see what none have seen. And if I refuse? The temperature plummeted, frost crystallizing on the walls around us. Then I take what I need, it said simply. Your consent is preferred, not required. I took a deep breath. I need time to consider. This isn't a small decision. Time, the entity mused. A human preoccupation. Very well. Until sunset. No longer. The figure dissolved, melting into the air like smoke. The gelatinous substance sank into the floorboards, leaving no trace. The house's normal sounds resumed. The tick of clocks, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of settling wood. I sagged against the wall, trembling. I had until sunset to find Catherine's device, if it still existed, or surrender to whatever the entity had planned for me. I searched methodically, desperately, starting with Gran's bedroom. If she had used the device to contain the entity, she would have kept it close. I tore through drawers, looked behind pictures, tapped walls for hollow spaces. Nothing. In her closet, I found a locked cedar chest. The key, predictably, was missing, but this was no time for preservation. I smashed the lock with a paperweight from her dresser and flung open the lid. Inside were the standard items one might expect: photo albums, old clothing, mementos. But beneath a carefully folded christening gown, mine, I realized with a jolt, was a wooden box about the size of a shoebox, its surface carved with intricate symbols I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a strange device that looked like an amalgamation of radio parts, watch components, and what appeared to be small crystals arranged in a precise pattern. A folded paper tucked beside it contained a simple diagram with a switch labeled "Activate" and a warning, 30 minutes maximum. Entity will adapt beyond this time. So this was Catherine's creation, the device she had built the night before her death. The tool Gran had used to contain whatever dwelled in the walls. But how had it come into Gran's possession? Had Catherine somehow passed it to Lillian before her death? Had Lillian given it to Millicent, who passed it to Evelyn? Another inheritance, parallel to but opposing the entity. The shadows in the room lengthened. Sunset was approaching. I carried the device downstairs to the study, the room with the yellow wallpaper where I had found Catherine's letters and journal. If this was where the entity had first revealed itself to me, perhaps this was where its connection to our world was strongest. The device was surprisingly heavy for its size. I set it on Gran's old desk and examined the diagram again. The operation seemed simple enough. Flip the switch and the device would generate whatever frequency Catherine had discovered disrupted the entity. But something nagged at me, the entity's words about Gran. She sealed me away, used Catherine's device to weaken me. But such measures are temporary. If Gran had used this device before, why hadn't she destroyed the entity permanently? Why pass the house and the burden to me, unless she couldn't destroy it? Unless the device could only contain, not eliminate. The room darkened as the sun dipped below the horizon. I was out of time. The temperature dropped dramatically, frost spreading across the windows in delicate patterns. The wallpaper began to ripple, the tiny blue flowers rotating to reveal eyes, exactly as in my dream. "Your time is up, Emma Winters." The entity's voice echoed from every corner of the room. "What is your decision?" I rested my hand on Catherine's device, finger poised over the activation switch. "Before I answer, tell me one thing truthfully. Why did Gran leave me this house? Why me specifically?" The entity manifested gradually this time, darkness gathering in the center of the room, solidifying into that too tall, too thin silhouette with its oversized head. "Because you were already mine," it said simply. "From the moment of your birth, when Evelyn held you in this very room and saw how you watched the spaces others couldn't see. She recognized the sensitivity in you, stronger than in any Winters before. She kept you away as long as she could, limiting your exposure to me. But she knew eventually you would return. The bloodline always returns. And what happens if I activate this device?" I tapped the box beneath my hand. The entity's form rippled, agitated. Temporary inconvenience. Catherine was clever, discovering resonant frequencies that disrupt my manifestation. But I adapt. Each time the device is used, its effectiveness diminishes. Evelyn learned this too late. So Gran tried to fight you, until she couldn't anymore. In the end, she surrendered, as you will. The only difference is the terms. Choose partnership, Emma. Choose power. I looked at the device under my hand, then at the entity before me. If what it said was true, activating Catherine's device would buy me time, but not salvation. The entity would adapt, return stronger, and I would face this choice again, partnership or consumption. Unless there was a third option, one neither Catherine nor Gran had considered. "You said you dwell in spaces between," I said slowly. "Between rooms, between moments. The liminal spaces, yes. The thresholds where reality thins. And this house, this particular house, is special to you? A stronghold." The entity's form expanded slightly, pride evident in its posture. "My sanctuary for nearly 2 centuries. The walls here are permeable to me in ways that exist nowhere else." I nodded, decision made. "Then I accept your offer of partnership, but with one condition." The entity drifted closer, curious. "Speak your condition." "We seal our partnership with blood. My bloodline bound to you formally, properly. An exchange that makes the connection permanent." The entity's form shivered with what I sensed was excitement. "Yes, blood, the final barrier. I accept your condition." I smiled, hoping it couldn't sense the racing of my heart. "Then we'll need to perform the binding at the strongest threshold in the house, the place where you first crossed over." "The attic window," it replied immediately, "where Catherine thought she escaped me, but only opened herself further." "Take me there," I said, palming Catherine's device and slipping it into my pocket, while the entity's attention was focused on the promised ritual. Together we ascended to the attic, the entity flowing around me like dark water, occasionally brushing against my skin with touches that burned with cold. The attic was bathed in the deep blue light of dusk, shadows pooling in corners and under eaves. The window, the same one Catherine had thrown herself from nearly a century earlier, stood at the far end, its glass warped with age, reflecting our distorted images. Me, small and solid. The entity, tall and fluid, barely contained in its approximation of human form. Here, it whispered, voice thick with anticipation, where the veil is thinnest, where I first tasted true human experience. I approached the window, Catherine's device heavy in my pocket. The glass was ice-cold beneath my fingertips. "Tell me what to do," I said. The entity moved behind me, around me, its substance brushing my arms, my face. "Open your palm. Let blood touch glass. The threshold remembers Catherine's blood. It will recognize yours as continuation, as completion." I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around not a blade, but Catherine's device. "Time for the gamble. You said the attic window is where you first crossed over," I said, turning to face the entity. "Where the veil is thinnest, where you're strongest." "Yes," it hissed impatiently. "Now complete the binding. But also where you're most vulnerable," I continued, pulling out the device. "Because a threshold works both ways, doesn't it? What lets you in could also force you out." The entity recoiled, its form rippling violently. "What are you doing?" "Testing a theory," I said, flipping the switch on Catherine's device. A high-pitched whine filled the attic, just at the edge of human hearing. The entity shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, like ice cracking, like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. "This changes nothing," it howled, its form contorting wildly. "I will adapt, as I always have." "I'm counting on it," I replied, backing toward the window. "Gran used this device to weaken you, to contain you, but she never thought to expel you completely." The entity's shape collapsed and reformed, struggling against the frequency Catherine's device was emitting. "You cannot expel me. I am bound to this house, to your bloodline. That's where you're wrong," I said, my back now pressed against the cold glass of the window. "You're not bound to the house itself, you're bound to the thresholds within it, the spaces between. And this threshold," I rapped my knuckles against the window behind me, "is where you're both strongest and most vulnerable." I pulled a small pocket knife from my jeans, Gran's old silver blade that I'd found among her things. Without hesitation, I sliced across my palm, warm blood welling immediately. "Yes!" The entity surged forward despite the device's whine. "The binding!" But instead of pressing my bleeding hand to the glass, I reached for the window latch. "Not a binding," I corrected. "A banishment." I threw the window open wide, night air rushing in, and slapped my bloodied palm against the wooden frame. Not the glass, but the very threshold itself. "You exist in the spaces between," I shouted over the device's increasing whine and the entity's shrieking. "So I'm changing the definition of that space." The entity seemed to understand too late what I was attempting. It lunged for me, but the combination of Catherine's frequency device and my blood on the threshold created a barrier it couldn't cross. With my blood, Winter's blood, I redefined the threshold. I improvised, working on instinct and desperate hope. "Inside this house is no longer your domain. Your space is out there." I gestured to the darkness beyond the window, beyond this threshold, beyond all thresholds of this structure. The entity writhed, its form elongating and contracting violently. "You cannot. This is not how it works. You don't have the knowledge." But something was happening. The walls of the attic were vibrating, plaster dust sifting down from the ceiling. The floorboards groaned as if under enormous pressure. Throughout the house, I could hear windows rattling, doors slamming open and closed. The entity's form began to stretch toward the open window, as if being pulled by an invisible force. "No!" it howled. "Centuries of work, my house, my vessels. Not anymore," I whispered, pressing my bleeding hand harder against the wooden frame, feeling the warm trickle down my wrist. By blood and threshold, I cast you out. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The entity's form stretched thinner and thinner, like taffy being pulled impossibly long, reaching from where it writhed in the center of the attic all the way to the open window. When the leading edge of its substance touched the outer side of the threshold, there was a sound like thunder, not heard with ears but felt in bones, and the entity was yanked violently outward, as if sucked through the window by hurricane-force winds. It screamed as it went, a sound I still hear in my nightmares, not of pain but of pure, incandescent rage. This isn't over, Emma Winters. What exists in the spaces between can never truly be banished. I will find another way, another threshold, another bloodline. Then it was gone. The night air suddenly still and ordinary. Catherine's device sputtered and died in my hand, its components smoking slightly. The house settled with a deep, groaning sigh, as if a great weight had been lifted from its foundations. I sank to the floor, shaking uncontrollably, my cut hand throbbing. Had it worked? Had I actually managed to banish an entity that had dwelled in this house for nearly 2 centuries? It seemed too simple, too improvised to have succeeded where Catherine and Gran had failed. Yet the house felt different. Lighter somehow, the air clearer, as if a subtle pressure I hadn't even been aware of had suddenly lifted. I bandaged my hand and spent the night in a hotel anyway, unwilling to trust my sense of victory. When I returned the next morning, tentative and watchful, the house remained silent. No scratching in the walls, no whispers from the vents, no flowers turning to eyes in the wallpaper. Over the following weeks, I systematically removed all the old wallpaper, replastered damaged sections of wall, and repainted every room in bright, clean colors. I discovered more of Catherine's journals hidden throughout the house, along with Gran's own records of her struggles with the entity. Together, they formed a comprehensive history of what had plagued my family for generations. I've spent the 3 months since that night researching thresholds, liminal spaces, and entities that might exist in the margins of reality. I've consulted experts in folklore, paranormal phenomena, and quantum physics. Most think I'm eccentric at best, delusional at worst. A few listen with more open minds. The house remains quiet, but I don't believe for a moment that the entity is gone forever. Its final words haunt me. What exists in the spaces between can never truly be banished. Perhaps I've only forced it to find a new threshold, a new bloodline to corrupt. Perhaps it's merely regrouping, adapting, planning its return. Catherine's device is beyond repair. Its components fused and melted from whatever power surged through it that night. I've taken to studying her journals intently, trying to understand the principles behind her frequency discoveries. In her final entries, she hinted at resonances that could not just disrupt but potentially destroy liminal entities. If such a thing is possible, I need to find it before the entity finds its way back. I still live in the house at 743 Sparrow Lane. It's mine now, truly mine, free of the malevolence that dwelled in its walls for so long. I've come to see it as my responsibility, my inheritance in the truest sense. Someone needs to stand guard at this particular threshold to ensure what was banished remains so. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, I think I hear scratching from somewhere outside. Not in the walls anymore, but beyond them, beyond the thresholds I've sealed with my blood and will. A reminder that it's still out there, watching, waiting. And sometimes, when I pass the attic window, which I keep securely locked now, its frame painted with a mixture that includes a drop of my blood renewed each month. I catch a glimpse of something tall and thin standing in the yard below, its head tilted up toward me, watching with eyes I cannot see but can feel. I don't know if what I did that night was a banishment or merely a relocation. I don't know if I've ended a familial curse or merely changed its terms. But I do know this. I've learned to check the spaces between things, the gaps in floorboards, the thin line between door and frame, the hair's breadth between window and sill. I've learned to listen for changes in silence, to feel for fluctuations in the air. And I've learned that inheritance comes in many forms, some welcomed, some not, but all requiring acknowledgement and respect. The entity claimed that I was already its from birth. Perhaps that's true in ways I'm still discovering. Perhaps the sensitivity that made my bloodline vulnerable to it also gives us the power to contain it. Perhaps Emma Winters was always meant to stand at this particular threshold, neither fully embracing the entity nor fully rejecting it, but keeping it in the space between where it belongs, where it has always been. I keep Catherine's journals beside my bed, along with Gran's records and my own growing collection of observations and theories. At night, before I sleep, I run my fingers over the scar on my palm, the mark of my confrontation, my banishment, my inheritance. And I whisper to the darkness beyond my windows, not tonight, not ever again. But sometimes, in my dreams, I hear it whisper back, time is on my side, Emma Winters. The spaces between are infinite, and I am very, very patient. So I remain vigilant. I research, I prepare, and I watch the thresholds. Always, always watch the thresholds. I still have the photo from my 8th birthday party. It's so faded now that you can barely make out the faces, but I keep it in my desk drawer anyway. Sometimes late at night, when the house creaks and groans with age, I take it out and stare at it, trying to remember what it felt like to be surrounded by people who loved me. In the photo, my mother stands behind me, her hands on my shoulders, her smile genuine but tired. My father is off to the side, already half turned away, as if he had somewhere better to be. And there, in the background, barely visible in the shadows near the kitchen doorway, is the dark smudge that I didn't notice until years later. The same smudge that has been following me ever since. I'm writing this down because Dr. Weaver said it might help. Externalize your fears, she told me during our last session, tapping her pen against her notepad in that rhythmic way that makes my skin crawl. Give them shape on the page so they have less power in your mind. She doesn't believe me, of course. No one does. But I know what I've seen. I know what I've heard. And I know, with absolute certainty, that something has attached itself to me. Something ancient and patient and hungry. Started 3 months ago when I moved into this house. The real estate agent called it a charming fixer-upper with historical character, which was code for falling apart and probably haunted. But the price was right, and after my divorce from Elena, I needed somewhere to disappear into. Somewhere I could lick my wounds in private. The house sits at the end of a dead-end street in Millfield, a small town that hasn't seen economic prosperity since the paper mill closed in the 1980s. The nearest neighbor is half a mile away, and the forest creeps close to the back of the property, its ancient trees seeming to lean toward the house in silent judgment. The first night was the worst. Not because anything happened, nothing did, but because of the silence. Living in the city for 15 years had conditioned me to fall asleep to the ambient soundtrack of traffic, distant sirens, and the muffled voices of neighbors. Here, there was nothing but the occasional rustle of leaves and the persistent tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. A clock that, according to the previous owner's daughter, hadn't worked in decades. I blamed it on the wind, on the house settling, on my imagination working overtime in unfamiliar surroundings. I took a sleeping pill and drifted off sometime after 2 a.m., only to jolt awake at 3:17 exactly. According to the digital clock on my nightstand, the ticking had stopped, and in its place was another sound, soft, rhythmic, like someone dragging their fingers along the wall as they walked slowly down the hallway toward my bedroom. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped just outside my door. I could see the shadow of feet in the crack beneath it, blocking the faint night light I'd plugged in at the end of the hall. A childhood habit I'd never outgrown and one that Elena had mercilessly mocked. The doorknob turned, slowly, almost tentatively, and I scrambled for my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. By the time I managed it, the door was open 6 inches, revealing nothing but the empty hallway beyond. The shadow was gone. The house was silent. I didn't sleep again that night. In the harsh light of morning, I convinced myself it had been a vivid dream, a side effect of the sleeping pill combined with the stress of the move. I spent the day unpacking, organizing my meager possessions in the spacious rooms. The house had been built in 1887 by a local industrialist who had made his fortune in textiles before losing it all in a series of bad investments. According to town records, he had hanged himself from the oak tree in the backyard, which still stood, gnarled and imposing, visible from my kitchen window. I tried not to think about that as I prepared dinner that evening. A sad affair of canned soup and crackers. I'd never been much of a cook, and without Elena to prepare meals, I'd fallen into the habit of eating whatever required the least effort. I was just sitting down at the kitchen table when I noticed the basement door was open a crack. I frowned. I hadn't been down there yet. The real estate agent had mentioned water damage and mold issues, and I'd made a mental note to call a contractor to check it out before I ventured down. I got up and pushed the door closed, making sure the old-fashioned latch caught this time. I was halfway through my soup when I heard it. A long, drawn-out creak as the basement door swung open again, seemingly of its own accord. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth, watching as the door opened wider and wider until it revealed the yawning darkness beyond. The stairs leading down were barely visible, disappearing into absolute blackness after the first few steps. "Hello!" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened even to my own ears. "Is someone there?" No response, just the soft whisper of air moving through the house, like an exhalation. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the linoleum floor with a sound that made me wince. I approached the doorway cautiously, flicking the light switch beside it. Nothing happened. Of course, the bulb would be burned out. I returned to the table and grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight again. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the wooden stairs, weathered and warped with age. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. One step down, then another. The wood creaked beneath my weight. "Hello!" I called again, sweeping the flashlight back and forth across the basement. The beam caught cobwebs, discarded furniture draped in sheets, cardboard boxes stacked against the far wall. But no person, no animal, nothing that could have opened that door. I was about to turn back when my light fell upon something on the dirt floor. A single footprint, small like a child's, pressed into the damp earth. As I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I heard a soft giggle from somewhere in the darkness behind me. I whirled around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly across the basement. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. "This isn't funny." The giggle came again, closer this time, followed by a whispered word that I couldn't quite make out. I backed up toward the stairs, keeping the light trained in front of me, scanning desperately for the source of the sound. My heel hit the bottom step, and I turned to run up, only to find myself face to face with a small, dark figure standing at the top of the stairs. It was there for just a second, a silhouette backlit by the kitchen light, the size and shape of a child, but somehow wrong, its proportions slightly off, its movements jerky and unnatural. Then it was gone, and I heard the basement door slam shut. I raced up the stairs, heart in my throat, and yanked on the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. I pounded on the wood, calling for help even though I knew no one would hear me. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the door suddenly gave way, sending me stumbling backward down several steps before I caught myself on the railing. The kitchen was empty, just as I'd left it. My soup sat on the table, now cold. The only evidence that anything had happened at all was the thin layer of dirt on my shoes and the 3 long scratches on the inside of the basement door. Scratches that hadn't been there before, at the height where a child's hands would reach. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the incidents escalated. Small things at first. Objects moved from where I'd left them. Doors I'd closed found open in the morning. The persistent smell of something burning even though the smoke detectors never went off. I tried to rationalize it all. The house was old, its foundations settling. My mind was playing tricks on me. A combination of loneliness and the aftereffects of a bitter divorce. But then came the whispers. They started as unintelligible murmurs, like a radio playing in another room. I would search the house, checking every corner, convinced that someone must have broken in. But I was always alone. Always. Until I wasn't. It was a Tuesday night. I remember because I'd had a teleconference with my boss earlier that day, explaining yet again why I needed more time before returning to the office. "Just a few more weeks to get settled," I'd said, ignoring the concern in her eyes. I knew how I looked, gaunt, with dark circles under my eyes from lack of sleep, my clothes hanging loose on my frame because I kept forgetting to eat. I was in the shower when the bathroom light flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I cursed, fumbling for the shower curtain, when I heard it. A voice, clear as day, right next to my ear. Daniel, just my name, spoken in a child's high, sweet voice. But there was something wrong about it, something off in the pronunciation, as if the speaker wasn't used to forming words. I scrambled out of the shower, slipping on the tile and crashing to the floor. Pain shot through my elbow where it connected with the toilet, but I barely noticed it. I was too busy staring at the shower curtain, which was now moving as if someone was running their hand along the inside of it. "Who's there?" I croaked, my throat tight with fear. "What do you want?" The curtain stopped moving. For a long moment, there was only the sound of water still running in the shower and my own ragged breathing. Then, slowly, a small handprint pressed outward against the plastic curtain. A child's hand, but with fingers that were too long, too thin, the joints bent at unnatural angles. I scrambled backward until my back hit the bathroom door. The handprint remained for several seconds before slowly sliding downward, leaving a smear of something dark against the white plastic. Then the lights flickered back on, and the handprint was gone. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I started researching the history of the house, digging through old newspaper archives at the local library. The industrialist who had built it, Edward Blackwood, had indeed hanged himself from the oak tree after losing his fortune. But the articles also mentioned something else. His 7-year-old daughter, Charlotte, who had disappeared 3 months before his suicide. She was never found. The police at the time had suspected Blackwood himself, theorizing that he had killed the child in a fit of despair over his financial troubles and hidden her body somewhere on the property. Extensive searches had turned up nothing, and eventually, the case had gone cold. I found a photograph of Charlotte in one of the articles, a solemn-faced little girl with dark hair and serious eyes, dressed in the formal style of the late 19th century. Something about her expression made my skin crawl. She wasn't smiling, but there was a suggestion of amusement around her mouth, as if she knew something the photographer didn't. When I returned home that evening, I found all the faucets in the house running at full blast, water overflowing onto floors and down drains. As I rushed from room to room, turning them off, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. A small figure darting just out of sight, the flash of a pale face reflected in a window. And everywhere I went, I found small, wet footprints. "You're experiencing a stress response," Dr. Weaver said during our first session. "Your mind is creating these scenarios as a way to process your grief and anger over the divorce." I wanted to believe her. I wanted there to be a logical, psychological explanation for what was happening. But that didn't account for the physical evidence. The scratches on doors, the footprints in dust, the child-sized handprints on windows that appeared overnight. It didn't explain why. When I finally worked up the nerve to search the basement thoroughly, I found a small, hidden chamber behind a false wall. A chamber containing nothing but a child's rocking chair, facing the corner. And it certainly didn't explain the voice recordings. I'd set up my phone to record overnight, desperate to prove to myself that I wasn't going insane. The first few nights captured nothing but the normal sounds of an old house. Creaking wood, the occasional skittering of mice in the walls. But on the fourth night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the recording picked up a child's voice, singing softly, "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." The song repeated 3 times, growing louder with each repetition, until it was suddenly cut off by a sound that made my blood run cold. A wet, gurgling noise, like someone drowning. I played the recording for Dr. Weaver. She listened with a carefully neutral expression, then suggested that perhaps I had recorded it myself while sleepwalking. "Sleep disorders are common in times of stress," she said, writing something in her notepad. "Have you considered medication?" I didn't tell her about the other recording from that same night, the one I discovered later at the very end of the file. My own voice speaking words I had no memory of saying. "She's in the walls. She's always been in the walls." Last night was the worst it's been. I'd finally decided to leave, to abandon the house and everything in it. I had packed a single suitcase and was heading for the door when all the lights went out at once. Not just the electric lights. My phone died, my flashlight flickered and went dark. The darkness was absolute, pressing against my eyes like a physical weight. And in that darkness, I felt small, cold hands touch my face. "Stay," whispered Charlotte's voice, so close I could feel her breath against my cheek. It smelled of earth and stagnant water. "Stay with me, Daniel. I've been so lonely." I screamed then, dropping my suitcase and flailing wildly in the dark. My hands connected with nothing, but I felt her all around me. Her presence like a cold mist, her laughter echoing from every corner of the house. I ran blindly, colliding with walls, tripping over furniture. Behind me, I heard the distinct sound of small feet running, keeping pace with me no matter how fast I moved. I made it to the kitchen and fumbled for the back door, my fingers closing around the knob just as something grabbed the back of my shirt. With a strength born of pure terror, I wrenched the door open and tumbled outside, sprawling on the damp grass. I lay there, gasping for air, expecting at any moment to feel those cold hands again. But nothing came. After several minutes, I dared to look back at the house. And there, framed in the kitchen window, was Charlotte. Not a vague shape or a fleeting shadow this time, but clear as day. A small girl in an old-fashioned dress, her skin deathly pale, her dark hair hanging limp around her face. She pressed one hand against the glass, those unnaturally long fingers splayed wide, and she smiled. It wasn't a child's smile. It was something ancient and hungry, filled with malice. As I watched, frozen in horror, she slowly raised her other hand and pointed. Not at me, but at the old oak tree where her father had died. I followed her gesture, my eyes adjusting to the darkness enough to make out the massive trunk and sprawling branches. And there, suspended from one of the lower limbs, was a rope ending in a noose that swayed gently in the breeze, as if beckoning. I spent the night in my car, parked at a rest stop 20 miles away. When morning came, I convinced myself that I had imagined the worst of it. The rope, Charlotte's smile, the inhuman quality of her eyes. Sleep deprivation can cause hallucinations, after all. That's what Dr. Weaver would say. But I know what I saw, and I know that I can't escape. Because when I finally worked up the courage to drive back to the house this afternoon, I found my suitcase sitting neatly on the front porch, waiting for me. And beside it was a child's drawing, done in what looked like mud and something darker. A crude picture of two figures holding hands. One tall, one small. On the back, written in the same substance, were 3 words, "You're home now." As I write this, night is falling again. The sound of the grandfather clock echoes through the house. Tick, 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 counting down to 3:17 a.m. I've barricaded myself in the master bedroom, pushed a dresser against the door, salted the windowsills like the paranormal websites advised. But I know it won't help, because she isn't confined to the house, you see. She's attached herself to me. To prove it, I took that old photo from my 8th birthday party and scanned it at high resolution. And there, in the background, barely visible in the shadows, is the figure of a small girl in an old-fashioned dress. She's been with me all along. I can hear her now, her small fists pounding against the bedroom door in a rhythm that matches the ticking of the clock. The wood is beginning to splinter. The dresser is inching forward with each impact, impossibly heavy as it is. "Let me in, Daniel," she calls, her voice sweet and terrible. "It's time to play. I don't have much time left. If you're reading this, know that I was not insane. What happened to me was real. The entity that called itself Charlotte was real. And if you ever find yourself in an old house at the end of a dead-end street in Millfield, and you hear the sound of a child singing at 3:17 in the morning, run. Run and don't look back. Because she's always hungry for a new friend. The pounding has stopped. The house is silent now, but it's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of something waiting, listening, gathering its strength. The doorknob is turning. She's here. The first thing I did after it happened was throw away all the mirrors in my apartment. It wasn't a rational decision. Nothing about my life has been rational since February, but I couldn't bear to look at reflective surfaces anymore. Not after what I saw in them. Not after what looked back at me. I've started keeping this record as a form of therapy, though I doubt any therapist would believe a word of it. Dr. Palmer suggested journaling might help process my delusions, as she calls them. But these aren't delusions. The bruises on my arms are real. The scratches along my back are real. The voice that whispers my name at 3:17 a.m. every night is real. God, I miss sleeping through the night. I should start at the beginning, though I'm not entirely sure when the beginning was. The most obvious starting point would be the day I moved into the Larkspur apartments 3 months ago. But looking back, I think it started earlier, subtle signs I dismissed or rationalized away. The way my coffee would be moved to a different spot on the counter when I returned to the kitchen. The unexplained cold spots in my previous apartment. The recurring dream of someone standing at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep. But for the sake of coherence, I'll start with the Larkspur. It was the only apartment in my price range after the divorce. Claire got the house, of course. She got everything. I got a stack of bills and a restraining order based on claims I still don't understand. The night terrors, she said. The sleepwalking. The things I supposedly said while unconscious. I never remembered any of it. The Larkspur was built in the 1920s, renovated sporadically over the decades with mismatched attempts at modernization. The realtor called it charming and full of character. Now I understand what those euphemisms really mean. My apartment was on the 4th floor, unit 418. The building had no elevator, so moving in was a nightmare of hauling boxes up narrow, creaking stairs. By the time I finished, my t-shirt clung to my back with sweat, and my fingers were raw from gripping cardboard. I remember collapsing onto the bare mattress, staring at the strange patterns in the ceiling plaster, thinking, this is rock bottom, can only get better from here. I was so fucking wrong. The first night was uneventful, apart from the building's settling noises, the kind of creaks and groans you'd expect from a structure nearly a century old. I attributed my restless sleep to unfamiliar surroundings. The second night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. Certain someone had called my name. The digital clock on my nightstand cast a red glow across the room, illuminating nothing out of the ordinary. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The third night, I woke again at exactly 3:17 a.m. This time, I sat up, heart pounding against my ribs. The air felt different, heavier, somehow, as if the oxygen had been replaced with something thicker. Something that resisted my lungs. The room was several degrees colder than when I'd gone to bed, despite the mild spring night. I checked my phone, 42 degrees Fahrenheit inside my apartment. Hello, I called out, feeling ridiculous even as the word left my mouth. No one answered, but as I reached to turn on the lamp, I heard it, the faintest whisper of my name. Daniel. It came from the corner of the bedroom, near the closet door I'd left slightly ajar. I froze, finger hovering over the lamp switch. Did I really want to see what was there? The rational part of my brain argued that it was just the neighbors, sound traveling through the old walls. Or maybe I was still half asleep, dreaming while awake. I turned on the light. Nothing. The closet door remained partially open, revealing hanging shirts and stacked boxes. I got up, heart still racing, and checked the apartment. All the doors were locked, windows secured. I was alone. After drinking a glass of water, I returned to bed, leaving the light on until morning. I called my sister Meredith the next day, trying to sound casual as I asked if she'd ever experienced anything strange in her first apartment. She laughed and launched into a story about her college roommate's sleepwalking episodes. I didn't tell her about the voice. Even then, I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. That weekend, I properly unpacked, arranging books on shelves and hanging pictures on walls in an attempt to make the apartment feel like home. The previous tenant had left a large mirror mounted in the hallway, an ornate thing with an aged bronze frame. I considered taking it down, but decided it added character to the otherwise bland space. As I worked, I kept feeling like someone was watching me. Each time I turned around, I saw only my own reflection in that mirror, looking increasingly tired and on edge. Sunday night, I dreamed of drowning. In the dream, I was underwater, lungs burning, struggling toward a surface that kept receding. Something had hold of my ankle, dragging me deeper. I woke gasping, sheets tangled around my legs, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:17 a.m. As my breathing steadied, I heard it again. "Daniel, I've been waiting." This time, the voice didn't come from the closet. It came from right beside my ear, so close I could feel the phantom breath against my skin. I scrambled out of bed, flipping on every light in the apartment. Nothing was disturbed, no signs of intrusion, but there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, like wet soil and something metallic. Blood, maybe, or copper. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight after 3 nights of interrupted sleep. I spent the day researching the building's history, convinced there must be something in its past to explain what was happening. The Larkspur was originally called the Harmon Hotel, built in 1924 by a local businessman named Edward Harmon. It was converted to apartments in the 1960s after a period of decline. Nothing particularly tragic in its history, no famous murders or suicides that might explain a haunting. Just a typical old building with typical old building problems. I was simultaneously relieved and disappointed. Part of me wanted an explanation, even a supernatural one. The other part desperately needed to believe I was just stressed, just adjusting to post-divorce life in a new place. That night, I took 2 sleeping pills, determined to get a full night's rest. I fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep almost immediately. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the blinds, and my alarm was blaring. For the first time in days, I felt rested, until I went into the bathroom and saw the words written in the condensation on the mirror. "You look just like him." I stared at the message, trying to process what I was seeing. The bathroom had been dry when I went to bed. There had been no shower run, no source of steam to create condensation. And yet there it was, 5 words, written in a childlike scrawl, already beginning to fade as the mirror dried. I called in sick again. That day, I met my downstairs neighbor for the first time. Mrs. Abernathy was in her 70s, had lived in the building for over 40 years. I casually asked if she'd ever experienced anything unusual in the building. "Unusual how?" she asked, eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. "I don't know. Strange noises, cold spots, that sort of thing." She studied me for a long moment before answering. "Apartment 418, right? You're in 418. I nodded. "That apartment's always had a high turnover," she said finally. "Most folks don't stay more than a few months." "Why's that?" She shrugged. "Some places just don't feel right to some people. Nothing specific. Just uncomfortable." She was hiding something. I could tell by the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. But she shuffled back to her apartment before I could press further. That night, I left every light on in the apartment and tried to stay awake past 3:17 a.m. I made it to about 2:45 before exhaustion overcame me. I woke to darkness. Every bulb in the apartment had burned out simultaneously. The clock read 3:17 a.m. The temperature had dropped so low I could see my breath forming clouds in the darkness. "Daniel, look at me." The voice came from the hallway, where the antique mirror hung. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, pull the covers over my head like a child. But my body betrayed me, legs swinging over the side of the mattress, feet finding the cold hardwood floor. I walked to the hallway slowly, as if in a trance. In the darkness, the mirror's surface seemed to swirl with shadows deeper than the surrounding gloom. As I approached, I noticed my reflection was wrong, slightly out of sync with my movements, a fraction of a second delayed. Then it smiled at me, though my own face remained frozen in horror. My reflection reached toward the glass, pressing its palm against the surface from the other side. Its mouth formed words I couldn't hear. Without conscious decision, my hand rose to mirror the gesture. Just before our fingertips would have met, I pulled back. The reflection didn't. Its hand pressed against the barrier between us, the glass rippling like water around its fingers. Then it began to push through. I ran, fled the apartment in boxers and a t-shirt, pounded on Mrs. Abernathy's door until she answered, bleary-eyed and confused. She took one look at my face and let me in without question. I slept on her couch until morning, fabricating a story about a power outage and thinking I'd heard an intruder. In daylight, I returned to my apartment. The lights worked perfectly. The mirror hung innocently on the wall, reflecting nothing but the ordinary hallway. I stood before it, studying my haggard reflection. The dark circles under my eyes, the pallor of my skin. Just as I was about to turn away, I noticed something odd about my reflection's eyes. The irises seemed darker, almost black. I leaned closer to the mirror, and my reflection did the same. But as our faces neared the glass, I saw the truth. Those weren't my eyes looking back at me. I tore the mirror from the wall immediately, carried it to the dumpster behind the building, and smashed it to pieces with a hammer I'd bought for hanging pictures. An older man taking out his trash gave me a strange look but said nothing. That night, things escalated. Without the mirror, whatever was happening found new ways to manifest. The whispers multiplied, coming from all directions at once. Invisible fingers trailed across my skin as I tried to sleep. The smell of wet earth and copper grew stronger, filling the apartment. At 3:17 a.m., every faucet in the apartment turned on simultaneously, water running ice cold. I began sleeping at a cheap motel, returning to the apartment only to grab clothes and check the mail. I looked into breaking my lease but couldn't afford the penalty. I was trapped, financially tethered to a place that was slowly driving me insane. After a week at the motel, my savings depleted. I had no choice but to return. I brought sage bundles, holy water ordered online, protective symbols from half a dozen religions. I was beyond skepticism, beyond rational explanations. I burned the sage in every room, splashed holy water in corners, drew symbols on doors and windows with chalk. That night was quiet. No whispers, no cold spots. I slept through until morning, waking refreshed and optimistic for the first time in weeks. Maybe it was over. Maybe my amateur exorcism had worked. 3 peaceful nights followed. I began to relax, to believe the nightmare had ended. I even invited Claire over, hoping to show her I was stable, functioning, worthy of another chance. She declined, voice tight with restraint over the phone. The restraining order was still in effect, she reminded me. Her lawyer would be in touch if I continued to violate it. I hadn't violated anything. I'd been careful to maintain the court-ordered distance. But arguing would only make things worse, so I apologized and hung up. On the 4th night, I dreamed of the mirror again. In the dream, I stood before it, but instead of my reflection, I saw a man who resembled me only in the broadest sense. Similar height and build, but with features twisted by hatred. He pressed his hands against the glass, which bulged outward like a membrane. "Let me in," he whispered. "Daniel, let me in." I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of breaking glass. The bathroom mirror had shattered, shards scattered across the tile floor. But it wasn't the broken mirror that turned my blood to ice. It was the wet footprints leading from the bathroom to my bedroom door. Barefoot prints, water still pooling in their impressions. I followed them to my closet, where they stopped abruptly. The closet door stood open, darkness yawning beyond. As I stared into that darkness, something stared back. I felt it, a presence watching, waiting. Then the closet door slammed shut. I called 911. When the police arrived, they found no evidence of an intruder.
No footprints.
No broken mirror. They took my statement with thinly veiled skepticism, exchanging glances that clearly communicated their assessment. Mentally unstable, possibly under the influence. They suggested I seek help, left a pamphlet for mental health services. The next day, I went to the building manager, an overweight man named Garson who perpetually smelled of cigarettes and cheap cologne. I demanded information about the apartment's previous tenants. Reluctantly, he admitted that the last occupant had moved out abruptly, breaking his lease and forfeiting his security deposit. Said he couldn't sleep there, Garson explained with a dismissive wave. Some people can't handle old buildings. They creak. They settle. It's normal. And before him? Pressed. Garson's expression changed, subtle, but I caught it. Look, buildings this old have stories. Doesn't mean anything. I insisted until he finally sighed and told me. 5 years ago, a former tenant had died in the apartment.
Suicide, officially.
He'd slashed his wrists in the bathtub after several months of what neighbors described as increasingly erratic behavior. He'd complained about voices, about his reflection moving independently. Everyone assumed mental illness. His name was Daniel Mills. My name is Daniel Chun. Different last name, different person entirely. But the same first name, the same apartment, the same complaints before his death. I researched Daniel Mills obsessively after that. Found his obituary online, then his social media profiles frozen in time. In his photos, I saw a man about my age with no striking resemblance to me beyond the basics. Dark hair, average height. Nothing that would explain you look just like him. But as I dug deeper, I discovered Mills had moved into the apartment shortly after a divorce. Like me, had worked in marketing. Like me, had suffered from night terrors as a child. Like me, the parallels were unsettling but could be coincidental. What couldn't be coincidental was what happened next. I began finding traces of him in my apartment. A cufflink that wasn't mine under the bathroom sink. A faded receipt with his name in the back of a kitchen drawer. Once, reaching beneath the couch for a dropped pen, my fingers closed around a small leather-bound journal. Inside, in handwriting increasingly frantic and uneven, Daniel Mills had documented experiences chillingly similar to my own. The whispers at 3:17 a.m., the cold spots, the feeling of being watched, the reflection that wasn't quite right. His final entry, dated the day of his death, is not leaving. It wants something from me, something I can't give. Unless I do this. I'm sorry. I should have moved out immediately. Looking back, nothing. Not financial constraints, not pride, not skepticism. Should have kept me there another night. But I stayed, convinced I could fight whatever had driven Mills to suicide. Convinced I was stronger. Last night proved me wrong. It began like the others, the drop in temperature, the heaviness in the air. But this time, when 3:17 a.m. arrived, the whisper came from inside my head. Daniel, I've waited so long. I felt pressure building behind my eyes, a splitting headache that brought me to my knees. Through blurred vision, I saw my hands reaching for a shard of glass on the bathroom floor. A piece of the mirror I'd broken earlier that day after seeing Mill's face instead of mine reflected in it. My fingers closed around the glass, cutting deep into my palm. I watched, helpless, as my own hand raised the shard toward my wrist. I was no longer in control of my body. With immense effort, I fought against the invisible force controlling me. My arm shook with the strain of opposing muscles, those under my control and those under something else's. Blood dripped from my clenched fist onto the white tile floor. "Let me in," the voice whispered, no longer just in my ears but resonating through my skull. "Let me finish." "Who are you?" I gasped, still fighting for control of my arm. Images flashed through my mind. The building in earlier days, the hallways bustling with hotel guests. A man in a hotel worker's uniform, watching guests through peepholes, collecting personal items from rooms, building shrines in his own quarters. The same man, decades later, an old caretaker in the converted apartment building, still watching, still taking. His death in apartment 418, alone and unnoticed for days. His spirit lingering, attaching itself to occupants who shared certain traits with his obsessions in life. Not every tenant, just the ones who reminded him of someone, just the ones named Daniel. With a final surge of willpower, I hurled the glass shard away from me. It shattered against the wall, breaking into pieces too small to pose a threat. The pressure in my head intensified, then suddenly released. I collapsed onto the bathroom floor, gasping for breath. When I looked up, he was there. Not in a mirror this time, but standing in the doorway. A figure composed of shadow and mist, vaguely human-shaped but with details that shifted and blurred. Only the eyes remained constant, dark, hungry eyes fixed on mine. "You can't escape," it said, voice clearer now that it wasn't confined to whispers. "No one named Daniel leaves this place alive." It moved toward me, the air growing colder with each step. I scrambled backward until my shoulders hit the bathtub. Trapped, the entity reached for me with hands that seemed both solid and smoke, fingers elongating unnaturally as they stretched toward my face. I closed my eyes, certain this was the end. Then my phone rang, the shrill tone cutting through the heavy silence. The entity hesitated, its form wavering like a candle flame in a draft. The phone continued ringing, and with each electronic chime, the apparition seemed to lose substance. I lunged past it, feeling an arctic chill as I moved through its dissipating form. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, Meredith calling, at 3:22 a.m. Why would my sister call at this hour? I answered, voice shaking. "Mir." "Danny." She sounded panicked. "Thank God. I had the worst dream about you. You were in trouble and I couldn't reach you, and..." She stopped. "I know it sounds crazy, but I had to call. Are you okay?" Behind me, I sensed the entity reforming, gathering its strength. But it seemed weaker now, as if my sister's voice, my connection to the outside world, to life beyond this apartment, was disrupting its power. "I'm not okay," I said, words tumbling out in a rush. "There's something in my apartment, mere something that wants to hurt me. I know how it sounds, but..." "I believe you," she interrupted. "I don't know why, but I do. Get out of there. Come to my place right now." The line between us seemed to physically repel the entity. It remained at the edge of my vision, a dark mass of roiling shadow, but unable to approach while I maintained the connection. "I can't move," I whispered. "It's blocking the door." "Stay on the phone," Meredith said firmly. "I'm calling 911 on my landline. Don't hang up, Danny. Not for a second." For over an hour, as I waited for help, Meredith talked continuously, her voice a lifeline tethering me to safety. The entity remained visible but at a distance, its form occasionally surging forward only to be pushed back by the invisible barrier of my connection to my sister. When the police finally arrived, pounding on my door, the entity vanished. Not gradually, but all at once, like a candle snuffed out. The officers found me huddled in the corner of my bedroom, phone still pressed to my ear, blood dried on my hand from the glass cuts. This time, they took me seriously. Perhaps it was the blood, or my obvious terror, or Meredith vouching for me when she arrived shortly after. They documented the broken glass, the cuts on my palm, the inexplicable cold spot in my apartment that their thermal scanner confirmed was a full 15 degrees colder than the surrounding area. I'm writing this from Meredith's guest room, where I've been since last night. I haven't slept, can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see those hungry shadow eyes staring back at me. Feel those elongated fingers reaching for my face. I've thrown away every mirror I owned, covered the reflective surfaces I couldn't remove with cloth or paint. But deep down, I know it won't be enough. Whatever attached itself to Daniel Mills has now attached itself to me. I can feel it, a weight in my mind, a presence just beyond my peripheral vision. Meredith wants me to see someone, a specialist in paranormal phenomena she found online. I've agreed, though I doubt anyone can help. The entity made its intentions clear. No one named Daniel leaves this place alive. I've considered changing my name, a desperate, probably futile gesture. If it found me through similarities with Mills beyond just a shared first name, a legal name change won't matter. It's 3:16 a.m. now, 1 minute until its power peaks. I can already feel the air growing heavier, the temperature dropping. Meredith sleeps down the hall, unaware that she can't protect me forever. The specialist is coming tomorrow. I just need to survive until then. But as I watch the digital clock tick over to 3:17 a.m., I hear it again, that whisper, somehow inside and outside my head simultaneously. "Daniel, I'm still waiting." And in the darkened screen of my phone, I see a reflection that isn't mine smile back at me. The worst part wasn't finding Jeremy's teeth scattered across the bathroom floor like pale pebbles. It wasn't even the way they clicked softly against the tiles when I stepped inside, my bare feet sliding them around in the darkness. No, the worst part was that I knew immediately they were human teeth, and I knew they were his even before I turned on the light. I should explain. My name is Eliza Mercer, and 3 months ago, I inherited my grandmother's house in Havermill. It sits at the end of a long gravel drive, nestled against the edge of Blackwood Forest, where the pines grow so dense they blot out the stars. My grandmother, Eleanor, had lived alone there for 42 years after my grandfather passed. I hadn't visited since I was 11. When the attorney called to tell me she'd left me everything, I felt more confused than fortunate. I didn't need the house. I had a perfectly good apartment in Boston, a job I didn't hate editing technical manuals, and a relationship with Jeremy that was comfortable, if not particularly passionate after 4 years. But life has a way of making decisions for you. 3 weeks after the inheritance, my company announced layoffs. 2 days later, Jeremy proposed, not out of romance but practicality. We could start over, he'd said, not looking up from his phone. Free house, lower cost of living. Makes sense. So we packed our lives into his Subaru and drove the 3 hours north to Havermill. The house waited for us, just as Eleanor had left it. A 2-story Victorian with peeling yellow paint and black shutters that hung slightly askew. It was larger than I remembered, with 3 bedrooms upstairs, a sprawling kitchen, and a formal dining room no one had used in decades. The furniture was all covered in white sheets, like ghosts frozen in various poses of comfort. Jeremy was silent as we walked through the house that first day. I attributed his mood to the drive, to the magnitude of our life change. I didn't notice then how the temperature seemed to drop when he entered certain rooms, or how the floorboards would creak in his wake, as if bearing an additional weight. "It's going to need work," he finally said, standing in the living room, "but it's got good bones." Good bones. That phrase returns to me now, echoing with sick irony. We settled in quickly. I took the smaller bedroom as my office, set up my laptop, and started freelance editing. Jeremy found work at the local hardware store and spent his free time restoring the house, replacing rotted baseboards, fixing leaky pipes, repainting walls. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Better than normal, actually. There was a peacefulness to the rhythms we established, a sense of purpose neither of us had felt in Boston. The first incident was so subtle I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. I was washing dishes one evening when I heard Jeremy talking upstairs. His voice was low, almost a whisper, with strange pauses as if he were having a conversation. When I called up to him, the house fell silent. I found him in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. He looked at me blankly. "No one. I heard you. I was on the phone," he said, though his phone lay on the nightstand, screen dark. That night, I woke to find him standing at the foot of our bed, facing the wall, just standing there, motionless in the dark. When I whispered his name, he didn't respond. I reached over and turned on the lamp. He blinked several times, looking confused. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Having a dream, I guess," he said, climbing back into bed. "Sorry, but I didn't think he'd been asleep at all." The changes in Jeremy happened gradually. He grew quieter, more introspective. He'd stare out windows for long periods, his eyes tracking something I couldn't see. His work on the house became obsessive. He tore up floorboards that looked perfectly fine to me, knocked down walls, pried away baseboards. He said he was looking for rot, for damage hidden beneath the surface. Sometimes I'd find him pressing his ear against the wall, listening for something. "Do you hear that?" he asked me once. I stood beside him, pressed my ear to the cool plaster. "What am I listening for?" "The humming," he said. "It never stops." I heard nothing but the wind outside and the normal settling of an old house. 6 weeks after moving in, Jeremy's physical appearance began to change. He lost weight rapidly, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. Dark circles formed under his eyes, giving him a hollow look. Most disturbing were the small bruises that appeared on his arms and neck, circular marks like fingerprints. "You're not sleeping," I told him over breakfast one morning. I hear you walking around at night. I sleep, he said, not meeting my eyes. Just not in the bed. What does that mean? He pushed his untouched food away. There's something in the walls, Eliza. In the floors. I can hear it moving. I suggested he see a doctor. He refused. I called his mother, who lived in Vermont, and she brushed off my concerns. Jeremy's always been high-strung, she said. Remember how he couldn't sleep for a month after watching that alien movie? But this was different. This wasn't fear of something imaginary. This was Jeremy changing before my eyes, becoming something I didn't recognize. The night I found a patch of his hair on his pillow, I insisted on a doctor. A clump of dark brown strands lay in a neat circle, as if cut away while he slept. But there was no bare patch on his head, no explanation for how it got there. He agreed to see someone, but the appointment was still 2 weeks away. That same night, I woke to the sound of scratching. Not the familiar scratching of mice in the walls. This was deliberate, rhythmic. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. I reached for Jeremy, but his side of the bed was empty. The scratching continued, coming from somewhere downstairs. I followed the sound to the dining room. In the dim light filtering through the windows, I saw Jeremy crouched in the corner, his fingers bloody as he clawed at the baseboards. "Jeremy," I whispered. He turned, and the expression on his face wasn't his own. It was ancient, calculating, hungry. For one terrible moment, I thought he might lunge at me. Then he blinked, and he was Jeremy again, looking confused and in pain. "My teeth hurt," he said. I helped him clean his bloody fingers and gave him ibuprofen for the pain. He fell asleep on the couch while I sat in the armchair, watching him, afraid to go back to bed alone. The next morning, over coffee, he said, "I think someone lived in this house before it was built." "What do you mean?" I asked, though something cold slithered down my spine at his words. "There was a structure here before, underground. I can feel it when I walk in certain places. The floor gives differently." I wanted to dismiss it as sleep-deprived rambling, but the certainty in his voice disturbed me. While he was at work that day, I went to the local historical society. The volunteer there, an elderly woman named Mrs. Prescott, seemed unsurprised by my questions. "The Mercer House," she said, nodding. "Built in 1892 by Thomas Mercer, your great-great-grandfather, I believe. Was there something on the property before that?" I asked. She hesitated, then pulled out a large leather-bound book of local history. "There was an earlier structure, yes. Not a house exactly. More of a... well, they called it a sanitarium, but that's a generous term for what it was. According to the records, the Havermill Sanitarium for the mentally afflicted had operated from 1843 to 1887 on the property. It burned down under mysterious circumstances, killing 12 patients and 3 staff members. The bodies were never recovered. Thomas Mercer purchased the land at auction the following year and built our house directly over the sanitarium's remains. "Your grandmother knew, of course," Mrs. Prescott said. "Eleanor was quite interested in the history. She donated several artifacts they found during renovations in the 70s. "Artifacts?" Mrs. Prescott led me to a glass display case. Inside were rusted medical instruments, a trepanning drill, bone saws, something that looked like pliers for extracting teeth. My stomach turned. "Primitive treatments," she explained. They believed mental illness could be cured by removing parts of the body where evil spirits might reside. Teeth were commonly extracted, especially from patients who bit or who claimed to hear voices. I left the Historical Society with a sick feeling. That night, I tried to tell Jeremy what I'd learned, but he seemed disinterested, distracted. He kept running his tongue over his teeth, wincing occasionally. "Does your mouth still hurt?" I asked. "They're loose," he said. "All of them." I insisted we go to the emergency room, but he refused. "It's not medical," he said. "It's the house. It wants something from me." 2 days later, Jeremy didn't come home from work. His boss called around 6 p.m., asking if he was sick. Apparently, Jeremy had left at lunch and never returned. I called his friends, his mother, even checked the local bars, though Jeremy rarely drank. By midnight, I was frantic enough to call the police. They took a report but didn't seem concerned. Adults go missing all the time, the officer said. Usually shows up in a day or two. I stayed up all night waiting. Around 3 a.m., I heard the front door open. Relief flooded through me as I ran downstairs, only to stop short at the sight of Jeremy standing in the entryway. He was covered in dirt, his clothes torn, his hands raw and bleeding. Soil caked his hair and eyelashes. He smelled of earth and something else, something chemical and antiseptic. "Where have you been?" I asked, keeping my distance. He looked at me with unfocused eyes. "Digging," he said, his voice hoarse. "I found where they put them." "Put who?" "The patients. Not in graves. Under the foundation. They're part of the house now." He smiled, and I saw that several of his teeth were missing, leaving dark gaps in his mouth. "They're waking up." I convinced him to take a shower. While the water ran, I called the psychiatric emergency line. They agreed to send someone in the morning. I made coffee, trying to keep my hands from shaking, and waited for Jeremy to finish his shower. And waited. After 20 minutes, I knocked on the bathroom door. No answer. The water was still running. I tried the handle, unlocked. Steam billowed out as I pushed the door open. "Jeremy?" The shower curtain was drawn. Jeremy's dirty clothes lay in a pile on the floor. I called his name again, but there was only the steady rush of water. Slowly, I pulled back the curtain. The tub was empty, but the drain was clogged with dirt, leaves, and what looked like small white stones. I bent closer, my heart hammering in my chest. They weren't stones. They were teeth. I ran through the house, calling Jeremy's name. Every room was empty. I returned to the bathroom and turned off the shower. The teeth scattered across the floor seemed to watch me, tiny white witnesses to something impossible. I gathered them into a plastic bag, hands trembling, and sat on the edge of the tub, trying to think rationally. People don't vanish from locked houses. They don't disappear from showers, leaving only their teeth behind. I called the police again. They were more interested this time, sending 2 officers to the house. They searched everywhere, took statements, bagged the teeth as evidence. One officer suggested Jeremy might have had a psychotic break, fled the house naked, pulled out his own teeth in some delusion. They promised to search the woods to put out an alert. For 3 days, I barely slept. I stayed at a motel in town, too afraid to be alone in the house. The police found nothing. No body, no trail, no explanation for what happened to Jeremy. His mother drove down from Vermont, her face tight with accusation, as if I'd done something to her son. On the 4th day, I returned to the house. I needed clothes, my laptop, something to keep me grounded in reality. The place felt different as I walked through it, heavier, watchful. In the bathroom, I half expected to find more teeth, but the floor was clean. I grabbed what I needed and was heading for the door when I heard it. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. The sound came from inside the walls. I froze, listening. It moved, traveling from the bathroom to the hallway, following the path I'd just taken. Something was in the walls, tracking my movements. I ran. In my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely insert the key, I glanced back at the house. A face watched me from the upstairs window, Jeremy's face, but not Jeremy's expression. Something ancient looked out through his eyes. I drove straight to the police station and told them what I'd seen. They sent an officer back with me, but of course, there was nothing to find. No Jeremy, no scratching in the walls. The officer suggested grief was playing tricks on my mind. That night, in my motel room, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello," I answered. Scratching sounds came through the speaker. Then a voice, Jeremy's, but distorted, as if speaking through something thick and viscous. "They're in my mouth now," he said. "Under my tongue, inside my cheeks. They've been waiting so long, Eliza." "Who has?" I whispered. "The patients. The ones they buried in the walls. They need bodies. They need to get out." The line went dead. When I called back, an automated message said the number was not in service. I spent the next week in a haze, moving through the motions of reporting Jeremy missing, speaking with detectives, calling hospitals and morgues. His mother returned to Vermont, convinced I was somehow responsible. Friends suggested grief counseling. No one believed my story about the teeth, the phone call, the face in the window. Last night, I finally went back to the house. I don't know why. Some pull I couldn't resist, some need for answers. The place was quiet as I walked through the rooms, touching furniture, looking at the renovation projects Jeremy had started and would never finish. In our bedroom, I lay down on his side of the bed, pressing my face into his pillow, searching for his scent. As I lay there, I became aware of a vibration beneath me. Not the bed, the floor itself seemed to hum with energy. I pressed my ear to the floorboards, just as Jeremy had done, and I heard them, voices, dozens of them, murmuring, whispering, crying out. And one voice, clearer than the rest, Jeremy's. "Come find me," he said. "I'm in the walls now." Something moved beneath the floor, pressing upward against the boards. I scrambled back, watching in horror as the floorboards bowed slightly, as if something just below was pushing, testing, seeking a way through. I fled downstairs to the kitchen, my heart pounding. The walls seemed to pulse around me, the house breathing with malevolent life. I grabbed my keys, determined to leave and never return, when I heard a wet, dragging sound behind me. Jeremy stood in the doorway, but it wasn't Jeremy, not really. His skin hung loose on his frame, as if whatever animated him didn't quite fill him properly. His mouth gaped open, a dark cavity where teeth should have been. His eyes were flat, lifeless. "They want you too," he said, voice bubbling as if through liquid. "There's room in the walls for both of us." He took a step toward me, movements jerky and uncoordinated. The smell hit me then, earth and chemicals and rot. I backed away until I hit the counter. "You're not Jeremy," I said. He tilted his head at an impossible angle. Parts of me are much older." I ran. Out the back door, across the yard, into the woods. I don't remember how long I ran. Only that when I stopped, I was lost among the trees, the night air cold against my tear-streaked face. I found a road eventually, flagged down a car, made up a story about getting lost hiking. That was yesterday. I'm writing this from another motel, 50 miles from Havermill. I haven't slept. Every time I close my eyes, I see Jeremy's toothless mouth, hear the scratching in the walls. I keep thinking about what Mrs. Prescott said about the sanitarium, about removing teeth to drive out evil spirits. But what if it wasn't about driving spirits out? What if it was about making room for something else to get in? My phone keeps ringing, unknown number. I don't answer, but I can hear the scratching through the speaker anyway, growing louder with each call. Last time, I thought I heard multiple voices, all speaking together, using Jeremy's voice as a conduit. "We're coming through," they said. "We've found the way out." I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to burn the house down, destroy whatever evil lives in its walls. But what if that's what they want? What if fire is how they spread, how they find new hosts, new bodies to inhabit? I've decided to go back one last time. Not to stay, but to understand. To see if there's any part of Jeremy left to save. I know it's foolish. I know I might never leave that house again. But I need answers. I need to know what happened to him. What's happening to me. Because this morning, when I brushed my teeth, I felt them shift slightly in my gums. Just a little looseness. Just a little give. And when I leaned close to the mirror, I thought I saw something moving behind my eyes. Something that wasn't me looking out. The scratching has started in the walls of this motel room now. Scratch, scratch, pause. They followed me. Or maybe they were always there, in every wall, waiting for someone to hear them. Waiting for someone to let them out. If you're reading this, it means I never came back. It means they found a way in or I found a way out. Either way, stay away from the house in Havermill. Stay away from the woods. And if you ever hear scratching in your walls, don't listen too closely. They learn your name if you listen too long. They find their way to your teeth. It began with the sour milk. Such a mundane thing to mark the beginning of my undoing. I was reorganizing the refrigerator, a task I'd put off for weeks while caring for my dying father, when I found the carton tucked behind a wall of condiments. When I pulled it out, something about its weight felt wrong. Too heavy for milk that had clearly expired weeks ago. The smell that escaped when I opened it wasn't just spoiled dairy, but something darker, earthier, like wet soil from a freshly dug grave. I poured it down the sink, but the liquid moved wrong. Too thick, too deliberate. It didn't splash or spatter. It slid down in one continuous, viscous rope, and I swear it paused just before disappearing down the drain. Just for a second, like it was deciding whether to go. I should have recognized that moment for what it was, the first thread unraveling in the fabric of my reality. Dad had been dead for 3 days by then. The funeral was yesterday. I was alone in his house, my childhood home, sorting through the accumulated debris of his 82 years. I had nowhere else to be. My own life back in Denver was in shambles after the divorce, my job lost during pandemic layoffs. At 43, I had returned to my roots with nothing but failure trailing behind me. I'd moved back in 6 months ago when his Parkinson's took a sharp turn, determined to let him die at home as he wished. The hospice nurse visited daily, but the bulk of his care fell to me. For half a year, I'd measured my days in medication schedules, diaper changes, and the slow, cruel erosion of the man who had raised me. That night, after the milk incident, I heard him call my name. Michael, clear as day, in his pre-illness voice, not the raspy whisper of his final weeks. I was in the basement, boxing up old Christmas decorations when it drifted down the stairs. Michael! I dropped the ornament I was holding, a faded paper star I'd made in 2nd grade, and it shattered on the concrete floor. The sound echoed strangely, lingering seconds longer than it should have. Dad! I called up the stairs, immediately hating myself for responding. I knew he was gone. I had watched the funeral director close the casket. I had thrown a handful of dirt onto it. No answer came, just the subtle shift in air pressure that happens when someone opens and closes a door somewhere in a house. I told myself it was grief. Auditory hallucinations aren't uncommon in the recently bereaved. I'd read that somewhere. I collected the broken pieces of the star and continued working, though my hands trembled slightly. That night, I slept in my old bedroom for the first time in decades. Dad had preserved it like a museum exhibit. Same Twin Peaks posters on the walls, same faded blue comforter, same dent in the wall where I'd thrown a baseball in anger after my first girlfriend dumped me. The familiarity should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like sleeping in a mausoleum. I woke at 3:17 a.m., not gradually but all at once, as if someone had called my name again. The digital clock's red numbers cast a bloody glow across the ceiling. The house was silent except for the soft tick of the hallway grandfather clock, a sound so embedded in my childhood memories that I'd stopped hearing it until that moment. 1 tick, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, then nothing. The clock had stopped. I lay perfectly still, suddenly aware of the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. The air in the room felt thick, like breathing through wet cotton, and cold, much colder than it should have been for May in Northern California. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something wrong with the ceiling. A dark patch directly above me, roughly the size and shape of a human body. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. Had there been a water leak? Mold? Then it moved. Not much, just a subtle ripple, like dark water disturbed by a gentle breeze. I stopped breathing. My body went rigid beneath the covers as primitive instincts screamed at me to remain absolutely still. The shape seemed to pulse slightly, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that didn't match my heartbeat or breathing. It was doing something else, something I couldn't immediately identify. Then I realized it was matching the arrhythmic ticking of the stopped clock. 1 pulse, 2 pulses, 3 pulses, then nothing. I must have passed out. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight was streaming through the blinds, and the ceiling was unblemished. Just textured white paint, the same as it had been since Mom had the room repainted when I was 15. Exhaustion, I told myself. Stress and grief playing tricks on my mind. I spent that day continuing to sort through Dad's belongings. His closet was full of flannel shirts that still smelled like his Old Spice deodorant. His desk drawers contained carefully organized files, tax returns going back 30 years, the deed to the house, Mom's death certificate. Everything was meticulously labeled in his architectural draftsman's precise handwriting. In his bedside table, I found a small, leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. The binding was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. Inside, in handwriting I didn't recognize, not Dad's careful print or Mom's looping cursive, were entries dating back to the 1920s, decades before my parents had bought this house. The entries were mundane at first, weather reports, accounts of daily chores, notes about neighbors. But as I flipped further into the journal, the tone changed. The handwriting grew more erratic, the entries more disturbing. May 17th, 1934. It watches me from the corners. When I turn to look, it slips away, always just out of sight. May 29th, 1934. Found another dead bird on the porch. Fifth one this week. Their necks are always broken. June 8th, 1934. The scratching in the walls is getting louder. Eleanor says she doesn't hear it. She looks at me strangely now. June 20th, 1934. It speaks to me at night. Uses voices I know. Yesterday it was Mother's voice, though she's been dead 7 years. July 2nd, 1934. Eleanor is gone. They think I did something to her. They don't understand what lives in this house. The final entry, dated July 15th, 1934, consisted of a single sentence. It's in the spaces between breaths. I closed the journal, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Why did Dad have this? Had he ever read it? The house had been built in the 1920s, so the timeline matched, but my parents had bought it in the 1970s, long after whoever wrote this journal had lived here. I set it aside, telling myself I'd look into the history of the house later. There was too much to do, too many decisions about what to keep, what to donate, what to throw away. That night, I heard the shower running. It was nearly midnight, and I'd been dozing in front of the TV in the living room. The sound of water hitting tile jolted me awake. For a moment, I thought Dad was still alive. He'd always preferred evening showers, before reality crashed back. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the banister. The bathroom door was closed, steam seeping out beneath it. The pipes knocked rhythmically in the walls, just as they always had when the shower ran too long. "Hello," I called, knowing it was absurd. No one else had a key to the house. No answer came, but the shower continued running. I placed my hand on the doorknob. It was ice cold despite the steam. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned it slowly and pushed the door open. The shower was indeed running, water sluicing down from the shower head at full blast. But the curtain was drawn back, and no one stood beneath the spray. The mirror above the sink was completely fogged over except for one clear spot in the center. Perfect handprint, much larger than mine or Dad's. I stepped into the bathroom and turned off the water with a shaking hand. As the last drops fell from the shower head, I heard something else. A wet, labored breathing coming from behind the shower curtain, which had now partially closed itself. I yanked the curtain back. Nothing. The breathing stopped, but the drain gurgled, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something dark and viscous, like the milk from the day before, retreating down the drain. I backed out of the bathroom and closed the door. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the living room with every light on, the TV blaring infomercials to drown out any other sounds the house might make. In the harsh morning light, I convinced myself I'd imagined it all. The stress of Dad's death, the isolation of being alone in this house filled with memories. It was taking a toll on my mental state. I needed to finish sorting through his things and sell this place as quickly as possible. But as I went through the kitchen cabinets that morning, I found something unsettling. Behind the cans of soup and beans in the pantry stood a row of milk cartons, at least a dozen, all unopened but clearly expired, judging by the bloated look of the containers. Some of the dates went back months, even before Dad had become bedridden. Why would he have hoarded milk? It made no sense. Dad had always been fastidiously organized, almost obsessively so. This kind of waste and disorder was completely out of character. As I reached for one of the cartons, I noticed something else. Tiny black marks on the white kitchen wall behind them. I pulled out more cartons to reveal what looked like handwriting. Cramped, desperate letters scratched directly into the drywall. It comes for the dying first. Feeds on decline. It will wear your father's face. I dropped the milk carton I was holding. It split open upon impact with the floor, but what spilled out wasn't milk. It was that same dark, soil-like substance I'd seen before, too thick to be liquid, too fluid to be solid. And embedded within it were what looked like small, white fragments, curved and broken, like pieces of eggshell or fingernails. I recoiled, gagging at the earthy, rotten smell that filled the kitchen. Then a sound from upstairs froze me in place. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy, dragging footsteps crossing my father's bedroom floor. The same uneven gait he'd developed in his final weeks as the Parkinson stole his balance along with everything else. "Dad," I whispered, hating the fragile hope in my voice. The footsteps paused. Then slowly they moved toward the bedroom door. I heard the distinct creak of the third floorboard from the threshold, the one that had always announced Dad's presence before he entered a room. I couldn't move. Terror and longing battled within me as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then, one by one, they began to descend. Thump, creak, thump, creak. I should have run, should have fled through the back door and never looked back. But something kept me rooted to the spot, the desperate, childish hope that I might see my father one more time. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Around the corner, just out of my sight. Then silence. "Dad!" I called again, louder this time. A sound came in response. Not footsteps, not words, but a wet, ragged inhale. The labored breathing I'd heard in the bathroom, but louder now, hungrier. I backed away toward the kitchen door, my eyes fixed on the entryway to the living room. A shadow fell across the threshold, stretching inhumanly long across the hardwood floor. Then it appeared. It had my father's general shape and size, but that's where the resemblance ended. Its skin was wrong. Too dark, too wet, like soil that had been soaked for days. Where its face should have been was just an impression of features, as if someone had pressed a hand into clay and then partially smoothed it out again. Only the eyes were distinct. Not my father's warm hazel, but milky white, pupilless. It stood there, swaying slightly, water or some dark fluid dripping from its form and pooling on the floor. Its chest expanded and contracted in that same arrhythmic pattern I'd seen on my ceiling. One breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. Then it spoke in my father's voice, his healthy voice from years ago. "Michael, you need to read the rest." "The rest of what?" I managed to whisper. "The journal. I kept it from you. Thought I could handle it myself." The voice was Dad's, but the mouth, that vague impression of a mouth, didn't move. I was wrong. It took a step toward me, leaving a wet footprint on the floor. "What are you?" I asked, my back now pressed against the kitchen door. "You know what I am." Another step. The smell hit me then, the same earthy, grave dirt smell as the substance from the milk carton. "I've been here all along, in the spaces between breaths." It lifted what should have been an arm, reaching toward me. I saw then that its hand wasn't a hand at all, but a collection of those small white fragments I'd seen in the spilled milk, clustered together in roughly the right shape. I ran, out the kitchen door, across the backyard, not stopping until I reached my car parked on the street. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the house. In my father's bedroom window stood his silhouette, watching me go. But it wasn't alone. Another figure stood beside it, smaller, with long hair that seemed to float around its head as if underwater. Mom, who had died when I was 12. I drove to a motel and checked in with nothing but the clothes on my back and my wallet. I sat on the edge of the bed, trembling, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Had I finally cracked under the strain of Dad's illness and death? Was I experiencing some elaborate hallucination? But I couldn't explain away the journal, or the writing on the wall, or the milk cartons, I needed to know more. After the sun rose, I drove to the local library and searched for information about my parents' house. It took hours of digging through microfiche and old newspaper archives, but eventually, I found something. July 16, 1934. A small article about a local man, Robert Caldwell, who had been institutionalized after the disappearance of his wife, Eleanor. The man had made wild claims about something living in the walls of their home, something that imitated voices and collected dead things. The police had found no evidence of foul play in the house, but Eleanor Caldwell was never found. The address listed in the article was my father's house. I searched for more information about Robert Caldwell and found his death certificate. He had died in the state psychiatric hospital in 1936. Cause of death: asphyxiation due to choking. I thought of the journal's final entry. It's in the spaces between breaths. As I drove back to the motel, a terrible realization began to form. Dad's Parkinson's had started with swallowing difficulties. His neurologist had explained it as common with the disease, the muscles of the throat becoming rigid and uncoordinated. But what if it had been something else? What if something had been feeding on his decline, as the writing on the wall suggested? What if it hadn't been Parkinson's at all? I thought of all the times I'd sat with Dad during his final weeks, watching his labored breathing, counting the seconds between each inhale and exhale as they grew longer and longer. The spaces between breaths expanding as whatever lived in those spaces grew stronger. I had to go back to the house, had to get that journal and read the rest, as the thing wearing my father's shape had told me to do. Perhaps there was a way to fight it, to send it back to whatever dark place it had come from. It was dusk when I returned. The house looked peaceful in the fading light, just an ordinary craftsman bungalow on a quiet street lined with liquidambar trees. No sign of the horror that waited inside. I used my key to enter through the front door, moving as quietly as possible. The house was silent except for the grandfather clock in the hallway, ticking again with perfect regularity. The journal was still on Dad's bedside table where I'd left it. I grabbed it and was turning to leave when I noticed something on his bed. An indentation in the shape of a body, as if someone had been lying there moments before. As I watched, the indentation deepened, the mattress compressing beneath an invisible weight. I backed toward the door, journal clutched to my chest. The bedroom grew colder, my breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. The indentation on the bed shifted, as if whatever made it was sitting up. I ran downstairs and out to my car. With shaking hands, I opened the journal and flipped past the entries I'd already read, looking for anything that might help me understand what was happening. The next pages were blank, dozens of them, until near the end of the journal. There, in my father's handwriting, were new entries. November 3rd, 2019. The diagnosis is official. Parkinson's disease. Doctor says progression could be slow with proper management. December 15th, 2019. Found another dead bird on the porch this morning. Neck broken just like the others. Starting again. February 20th, 2020. The scratching in the walls keeps me awake at night. It knows I'm vulnerable now. April 16th, 2020. I see Margaret sometimes, just at the edge of my vision. I know it's not really her. It's using her to weaken me. September 30th, 2020. Michael is coming to live with me. I need to protect him, but I don't know how. It's growing stronger as I grow weaker. December 25th, 2020. Found milk turned to soil again. That's how it manifests at first. The substance between worlds. The entries continued, chronicling Dad's deteriorating condition alongside increasingly disturbing incidents. The final entry was dated just 3 days before he died. May 1st, 2023. It's in the room with me now. Watching. Waiting. Michael doesn't see it, but sometimes I think he senses it. I should have warned him, but I thought I could beat this thing. Caldwell's notes say there's a way to trap it, bind it to a single vessel. I've made my preparations. May God forgive me for what I'm about to do. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. What preparations had Dad made? What vessel had he tried to trap this thing in? As if in answer, my phone rang. The screen showed Dad's house as the caller ID. We kept the landline active during his illness for the hospice nurses to use. I answered without speaking. Michael, Dad's voice, weak and faltering as it had been in his final days. Come home. I need to show you. You're not my father, I whispered. No, the voice agreed. But I have his memories. I know what he did, what he tried to do to me. A wet, rattling breath. He thought he could trap me in his own dying body, take me with him into death. I felt sick. Had Dad's final act been an attempt to destroy this thing, to sacrifice himself to save me? But it didn't work, the voice continued, because he didn't understand what I am. No one does, except maybe you, Michael. You've always been sensitive to the spaces, the gaps between what is and what isn't, between breath and no breath, between life and death. What do you want? I asked. To show you. Come home. The line went dead. I sat in my car, staring at the darkened house. I had two choices. Drive away and never come back, or go inside and face whatever was waiting. If I left, would it follow me? Or would it stay, bound to the house, waiting for the next vulnerable occupant? I thought of the journal entries, both Caldwell's and my father's. They'd both tried to fight this thing in their own ways. Both had failed, but they'd left clues, information that might help me succeed where they had failed. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. The house was silent as I entered, but not empty. I could feel its presence, a heaviness in the air, a pressure behind my eyes. I moved through the room slowly, journals still clutched in my hand like a talisman. In the living room, I found them waiting. Dad sat in his favorite armchair, looking exactly as he had in life before the disease had ravaged him. Beside him stood Mom, beautiful and intact, not the cancer-hollowed shell she'd been at the end. "Hello, son," Dad said, smiling warmly. "We've been waiting for you." "You're not them," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "No," Dad's shape agreed, "but we could be. For you. Don't you want your family back?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the journal to Caldwell's final entry. It's in the spaces between breaths. "What are you?" I asked again. Mom's shape smiled, head tilting at an angle just slightly too sharp to be natural. "We are the in-between, the pause between heartbeats, the silence between words. We have always been here," Dad's shape added, "in the margins of existence, feeding on endings. And beginnings," Mom's shape whispered, her eyes suddenly fixing on me with terrible hunger. "Each ending creates a new beginning, new spaces for us to fill." I understood then. Dad hadn't been its only target. It had been watching me too. A man whose life had completely fallen apart, who had come home with nothing but loss trailing behind him. I was as vulnerable as my father had been, just in a different way. "No," I said firmly. "You can't have me." Dad's shape laughed. A horrible, wet sound. "We already do. From the moment you poured that milk down the drain. From the moment you heard your father's voice. From the moment you slept beneath our shadow." As if on cue, both figures began to change, their human facades melting away to reveal what lurked beneath dark, sodden masses composed of soil and fragments and fluid, vaguely human-shaped but wrong in every detail. They moved toward me, leaving wet trails on the hardwood. The room grew cold, my breath visible in puffs of white. The grandfather clock in the hallway stopped ticking. I backed away until I hit the wall. The journal fell from my nerveless fingers, landing open on the floor. As it fell, something slipped from between its pages. A folded piece of paper I hadn't noticed before. I snatched it up as the creatures drew nearer. It was a note in Dad's handwriting, addressed to me. "Michael, if you're reading this, I failed. The thing in this house cannot be destroyed by conventional means. It exists in the spaces between breaths, between heartbeats, between thoughts. But these spaces are also its weakness. It feeds on the awareness of itself. The more you perceive it, the stronger it becomes. The more you fear it, the more substance you give it. To defeat it, you must close the spaces, fill the gaps, leave it nowhere to exist. I love you, son. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this." Dad Close the spaces? Fill the gaps? What did that mean? The creatures were almost upon me now, their forms rippling and shifting, those horrible white eyes fixed on mine. I could smell the grave earth scent of them, feel the cold radiating from their bodies. Then I understood. It exists in the spaces between breaths. I took a deep breath and held it, closed my eyes, focused on the beating of my heart, making it as steady and regular as possible.
No gaps. No spaces.
The room grew impossibly cold. I felt something wet and heavy touch my face. Not a hand, but something trying to approximate one. I kept my eyes closed, kept holding my breath, kept focusing on the perfect rhythm of my heartbeat. My lungs burned. The thing's touch became more insistent, pressing against my mouth and nose as if trying to force itself inside. Still, I held on, picturing my body as a solid, unbroken thing. No spaces, no gaps, no way in. Just as spots began to dance behind my closed eyelids from lack of oxygen, I heard a sound like air rushing into a vacuum. The pressure against my face vanished. I opened my eyes. The living room was empty. The cold was gone. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. I exhaled shakily and took another careful breath. Had it worked? Were they gone? For the rest of the night, I sat rigid in Dad's armchair, barely allowing myself to blink, keeping my breathing as steady and regular as possible. Every time I felt my concentration slip, the room would grow subtly colder, and I would redouble my efforts. By morning, I was exhausted but still alone. No sign of the entities remained except for the faint smell of damp earth that seemed to have seeped into the house itself. I spent the day methodically emptying the house of anything that might harbor spaces for them to hide. The milk cartons went first, then Dad's clothes with their empty sleeves, the unused pillows on beds, even the gaps between books on shelves. I filled every literal and metaphorical space I could find. That night, for the first time since Dad died, I slept without waking. No shapes on the ceiling, no footsteps on the stairs, no voices calling my name. I listed the house with a realtor the next day. She asked if I needed to disclose anything about the property. I thought of the journal, which I had burned in the backyard fire pit, of the note from Dad, which I keep with me always, of the things I had seen, which no one would believe. No, I said, nothing to disclose. I moved back to Denver the following week, found a new job, rented a small apartment with no history, no memories, no spaces for anything to hide. But sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I become acutely aware of the pause between my heartbeats, the gap between 1 second and the next, the space between breathing in and breathing out. And I wonder if they followed me after all, if they're waiting in those infinitesimal spaces, growing stronger as my awareness of them increases. So I write this as both warning and confession. Check your expired milk. Listen for stopped clocks. Watch for shadows that move against the laws of light. And whatever you do, don't acknowledge the spaces between breaths, because something lives there, and it's always hungry. I still taste copper when it rains. That's how it starts, with the metallic tang coating my tongue, as if I've been sucking on old pennies. The doctors said it was psychosomatic, another manifestation of trauma-induced sensory hallucination. They prescribed pills that made my thoughts sluggish but did nothing for the taste. Because it isn't in my head. It's a warning. It's been 7 months since I moved into my grandmother's house after her passing. 7 months of trying to convince myself that grief has been playing tricks on my mind. 7 months of failed rationalization. I'm writing this down now because I need someone, anyone, to understand what's happening here, even if you think I'm just another lunatic spinning tales on the internet, because I'm afraid tonight might be my last chance. I never planned to live here. The 2-story Victorian in rural Maine had been intended for sale, a financial windfall I desperately needed after losing my job at the architectural firm in Boston. But something stopped me from signing with the realtor that gray March afternoon. Maybe nostalgia for childhood summers spent here, or the realization I had nowhere better to go. Maybe something else entirely was already exerting its influence. The first night, I convinced myself the house was merely settling. Old houses make noise. They breathe and creak as temperature changes cause wood and metal to expand and contract. Rational explanations exist for floorboards that groan despite no footsteps, for water pipes that knock and rattle behind plastered walls, for windows that whistle when wind finds the gaps in ancient weather stripping. But rational explanations don't account for the whispers. They began on the third night, just at the edge of hearing, indistinct murmurs that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I'd be drifting off to sleep when they'd start, not loud enough to make out words, but persistent enough to jolt me awake. I bought earplugs. I ran a white noise machine. Nothing helped. If anything, the whispers seemed to intensify, to press directly against my eardrums despite the barriers. Old house, I told myself each morning, eyes red-rimmed from insomnia. Wind through the vents, pipes, mice in the walls. But mice don't call your name. The photograph appeared in April. I'd spent weeks cleaning out grandmother's belongings, boxing up clothes for donation, sorting through decades of accumulated trinkets and keepsakes. The attic had been my final frontier, a dust-choked repository of furniture draped in yellowed sheets and stacked cardboard boxes with faded labels. I found it at the bottom of a hat box, beneath brittle tissue paper and a veil that disintegrated at my touch. The photograph was small, sepia-toned, with scalloped edges. 5 people stood before the house, their expression solemn as was customary for photographs of that era. I recognized my grandmother as a young woman on the far right. The others were strangers, 2 men in dark suits, an older woman, and a girl of perhaps 12 or 13 in a high-collared dress. What made me drop the photograph wasn't the unfamiliar faces. It was the 6th figure, standing in an upstairs window, a blurred, dark shape with no discernible features except for 2 pale spots where eyes should be. I told myself it was a photographic anomaly, a trick of light or a double exposure. I placed the photograph face down on my bedside table, intending to examine it more closely in the morning light. But when morning came, the photograph was gone. I tore apart my bedroom looking for it. I combed through the bedsheets, moved furniture, checked under the bed and inside drawers I knew I hadn't opened. The photograph had vanished as if it had never existed. That was the first time I truly considered I might be losing my mind. The house began to change after that. Subtle alterations at first. A chair slightly out of place. A door I was certain I'd closed standing ajar. The persistent cold spot in the upstairs hallway that no amount of heating could dispel. I started keeping a journal, documenting these irregularities, trying to establish patterns or explanations. May 12th. Found all the kitchen cabinets open this morning. Certain I closed them before bed. May 19th. 3rd time this week waking to the smell of smoke. No source found. May 24th. Scratching in the walls all night. Called exterminator. He found nothing but said the insulation showed signs of having been disturbed. Refused to elaborate when pressed. June 2nd. Woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of footsteps overhead. No one should be in the attic. I didn't go to the attic to check. Some primordial instinct kept me rooted to my bed, heart hammering against my ribs, ears straining to track the deliberate footfalls moving from one end of the ceiling to the other, back and forth, for hours, until dawn broke and they finally ceased. The next night, I moved my bedding to the living room sofa. The footsteps followed, now on the 2nd floor, directly above the living room. I retreated to the kitchen. The footsteps adjusted course accordingly. Whatever walked in this house knew exactly where I was at all times. The dreams started in early summer. Not nightmares exactly, something worse. They felt more like memories, playing out with perfect clarity despite being events I had never witnessed. In these dreams, I watched a family living in my grandmother's house. The same people from the photograph, I realized, though their faces were clearer now. The father was stern, with a thick mustache and perpetually furrowed brow. The mother was delicate, moving through rooms with a hand pressed to her chest as if constantly short of breath. The daughter, I came to think of her as Anna, though I don't know why, was solemn and watchful, with dark braids and eyes too old for her young face. I observed them going about daily routines. Meals eaten in tense silence, prayer before bed, the father reading from a black Bible while the others listened with heads bowed. Nothing overtly sinister happened in these dreams, yet they left me with a lingering sense of dread, as if I were watching people performing normal actions while balanced on the edge of an unseen precipice. The dreams shifted as summer progressed. The mother began to appear less frequently. The father grew more severe. Anna became increasingly withdrawn, jumping at small sounds, watching corners of rooms as if expecting something to emerge from them. In the last of these dreams, I saw Anna alone in what is now my bedroom, kneeling beside her bed in prayer. Her lips moved silently, tears streaming down her face. She kept glancing toward the closet, where the door stood slightly open, a slice of perfect darkness visible in the gap. As I watched, unable to intervene, a pale hand emerged from that darkness, long-fingered and unnaturally jointed. It reached toward her with terrible slowness. I tried to scream, to warn her, but could make no sound. Just before the hand touched her shoulder, Anna turned and looked directly at me. Not through me as a dream figure should, but at me, her eyes locking with mine across time. "It's hungry again," she said clearly, "and now it knows you're here." I woke drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs like restraints. The taste of copper flooded my mouth, and for the first time, I heard the whispers clearly enough to distinguish words. Find me below, find what they did." I avoided the basement for as long as possible. It had been sealed off when I was a child, grandmother explaining it was because of moisture problems that made the space unsafe. The door at the top of the basement stairs had been fitted with a heavy padlock, the key to which I had found among grandmother's things but hadn't used. After the dream about Anna, I found myself standing before that door, key in hand, with no clear memory of having decided to go there. My rational mind screamed warnings. Basements in old houses often contained hazards. Exposed asbestos, rusted nails, rotting support beams. Yet my hand moved of its own accord, fitting the key into the lock, turning it with a resistant screech of metal. The door swung inward, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. The smell that rose to meet me was not the expected mustiness of a long-sealed space, but something sharper, minerally and organic at once. Like wet soil and old blood, I found the light switch, an old ceramic knob that turned with a click. A single bulb illuminated the stairs but did little to penetrate the darkness below. I descended slowly, each step creaking beneath my weight. The air grew colder with every foot of descent, until my breath clouded before me despite the July heat outside. The basement was larger than I had expected, extending beneath the entire footprint of the house. Support columns rose at regular intervals, massive wooden beams that disappeared into the shadows above. The floor was packed earth rather than concrete, unusual for a house of this age. More unusual still were the strange markings dug into that earth, concentric circles surrounding what appeared to be a crude altar fashioned from stacked fieldstones. I approached it slowly, the copper taste flooding my mouth so intensely I had to spit. The stone surface of the altar was stained dark in the center, the discoloration spreading outward like a blooming flower. I didn't need to be told what had caused those stains. A small wooden box sat beside the altar, hand-carved, with no visible hinges or lock, just a simple sliding lid. I should have left it alone, should have retreated up those stairs, locked the door, called a realtor, and fled this place forever. Instead, I reached for the box. Inside was a journal, the leather cover cracked and brittle with age. I opened it with trembling fingers to find pages filled with cramped handwriting. The ink had faded to brown, but the words remained legible. April 12, 1887. The hunger grows worse. Elizabeth worsens daily despite our prayers. The doctor speaks of consumption, but I know better. I have seen the marks upon her neck in the morning, though she will not speak of them. Our daughter watches the shadows with knowing eyes. There are whispers in this house that are not born of human throats. April 20th, 1887. Found Reverend Cole's book today. The old ways may be our only salvation now. God forgive me for what I must do. The entries continued, growing more disturbed and fragmented. The writer, who I came to understand was the father from my dreams and the photograph, described performing rituals in the basement to combat whatever presence had taken hold in the house. The final entry, dated June 17, 1887, contained only 5 words. God forgive me. Anna forgive me. I closed the journal, my hands shaking uncontrollably. As I did, something slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the ground. I bent to retrieve it, another photograph smaller than the first. It showed the altar before me, but fresh, the stains vivid and wet. Atop it lay a small body in a white nightgown, dark braids framing a peaceful face. Anna. The whispers erupted around me then, no longer at the edge of hearing but deafening. Dozens of voices speaking in unison. He gave me to it to save the others. But it wasn't enough. It's never enough. The single bulb illuminating the basement shattered, plunging me into darkness. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet in my haste to escape. My back collided with something solid, not the wall, but something that yielded slightly on impact. Something that exhaled softly against my neck. I ran. Blind with terror, I somehow found the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my hands scrabbling at the wall for support. Behind me came a sound like fingernails on wood, keeping pace. I slammed the basement door and locked it with fumbling fingers, then collapsed against it, gasping for breath. For several minutes, there was silence. Then, softly, a scratching at the door. Gentle at first, almost hesitant. Then more insistent. Then violent. A frenzied clawing that made the heavy wood vibrate against my back. Continued for hours. I didn't move. Couldn't move. When it finally stopped, the sudden silence was almost worse. I should have left then. Should have walked out the front door and never looked back. But something kept me here. Some awful combination of morbid fascination, disbelief in what was happening, and the increasingly persuasive thought that I was simply having a psychological breakdown. Reality couldn't possibly be unraveling in the way it seemed to be. So I stayed. I sealed the basement door with duct tape. I placed salt lines along windowsills and thresholds. A superstitious gesture gleaned from half-remembered folklore. I kept lights burning constantly. None of it mattered. Whatever had been contained in the basement was now free in the house. I heard it at night, moving through rooms with a shuffling gait, its breathing a wet, labored sound. Objects moved or disappeared entirely. Food rotted in the refrigerator overnight. The mirrors began to show reflections that moved independently of me. Just subtle delays at first, then more overt discrepancies. My reflection would turn its head when I remained still, or its lips would move to form words I wasn't speaking. I covered every reflective surface in the house with sheets. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping except in brief, involuntary bursts from which I would wake to find new bruises or scratches on my body. Long, thin welts like those left by grasping fingers. Last night, it escalated. I had managed to doze off in an armchair, the journal from the basement open on my lap. I'd been reading it obsessively, searching for clues, for some understanding of what was happening. I woke to the sound of paper tearing. In the dim light of the single lamp I kept burning, I saw the journal's pages turning by themselves, faster and faster, until they were simply a blur of motion. The lamp flickered, and in that momentary darkness, the movement stopped. When light returned, a new page faced me. But the handwriting was not the faded script of Anna's father. It was fresh, written in something dark and still glistening. "I know what you taste like." I threw the journal away from me with a cry. It hit the far wall and fell open to another page. "I am the hunger beneath." The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath frosted in the air before me. The lamp dimmed again, and in that deepening gloom, I saw it clearly for the first time. It stood in the corner, a figure of impossible angles, its limbs too long and jointed in too many places. Its skin was like wet clay, stretched over a frame that only approximated humanity. Where its face should have been was a smooth expanse of flesh, interrupted only by a mouth that split its head from ear to ear, a mouth filled with needle-like teeth arranged in concentric circles. As I watched, paralyzed with terror, the mouth opened wider than any mouth should be able to, unhinging like a snake's jaw. From within that cavernous maw came the whispers, thousands of them overlapping. Hungry, so hungry, feed me, join us. The thing took a step toward me, movement jerky as if it were being operated by unseen strings. Another step. I could not move, could not scream, could only watch as it crossed the room with that unnatural gait. It reached for me with those two long fingers, and where they brushed my skin, I felt an icy burning, as if my flesh were being scoured with frost. The copper taste flooded my mouth so intensely I gagged. Then, abruptly, it stopped, its head tilted at an impossible angle, nearly touching its own back. It seemed to listen to something I couldn't hear. The whispers ceased. "Not yet," it said, in a voice like stones grinding together. "First you must know. First you must see." It retreated to the corner, folding in on itself like paper being crumpled, until nothing remained but a shadow slightly darker than those around it. I fled to the bathroom, the only room with a lock I trusted. I've been here ever since, writing this account on my phone. Outside the door, I hear it moving through the house. Sometimes it scratches at the door, almost playfully. Sometimes it whispers words I can't quite make out. It's toying with me, I think, building my fear, savoring it. The rain started an hour ago. The copper taste has never been stronger. I've pieced together what happened here. Anna's father, desperate to save his wife from whatever entity had taken up residence beneath the house, made a terrible bargain. A sacrifice. His own daughter offered to the hunger below. But it wasn't enough. It's never enough. Generations of my family have lived in this house since then. How many knew? How many covered up what happened here? How many fed it in other ways to keep it contained? Grandmother must have known. The padlock, the sealed basement, the way she would never speak of the house's history, the ritual items I found among her things that I dismissed as eccentric collectibles. I think when she died, the binding weakened, and now it wants me, the last of the bloodline, to join Anna, to join all the others it has taken over the years. I can hear it outside the door now. The scratching has stopped. Instead, there's a soft singing. A child's voice, sweet and clear, singing a lullaby I remember my grandmother singing to me. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." The door handle is turning, though I know I locked it. The metal is warping, melting like wax. The singing continues, but the voice is changing, deepening, multiplying into a chorus of mismatched tones. "Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The door is opening now. I can see something oozing around the edges. Not a liquid, but a darkness with weight and substance. Smells like wet earth and old blood. I should end this, throw my phone away, face what's coming with whatever dignity I can muster. But I want someone to know what happened here. I want someone to understand what lives beneath this house, what has always lived here, feeding on fear and pain and flesh. It's in the room now. The darkness is taking shape. Those long fingers reaching. If you're reading this, don't come looking for me. Burn this place to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. Because the hunger beneath never dies. It only waits. The copper taste is overwhelming now. I can barrel TTP. The whipsers are so loud. So many voices. Anna's voice among them, saying I'll be with her soon. Saying I'll finally understand. Saying I'll finally be Pa. The tape measure showed 7 feet, 6 inches from floor to ceiling. Peculiar height for a bedroom, but that was the least of my concerns about this house. I'd spent 3 nights staring at that ceiling, watching the shadows stretch like fingers across its surface. Sometimes they seemed to reach for me. This is my confession. I don't expect you to believe it. I wouldn't. But I need to document what happened in that house on Larkspur Lane before I lose my grip on reality entirely. The doctors say writing might help. They don't know what I'm writing. My name is Eliza Kern. I'm a sound engineer, or I was, before the accident that left me with chronic tinnitus and a prescription for silence. The irony wasn't lost on me. A woman who built her life around sound, now unable to tolerate it. After my discharge from the hospital, I needed somewhere quiet to recover, somewhere isolated where neighbors' televisions and street noise wouldn't trigger migraines that left me vomiting and disoriented. When I found the listing for the old Victorian on Larkspur Lane, it seemed perfect. The real estate agent mentioned it had been vacant for nearly 3 years. Bit of a fixer-upper, she said with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. But the price is right, and it's certainly quiet. She wasn't wrong. The house sat at the end of a dead-end road, backed by a dense stretch of woods. The nearest neighbor was over half a mile away. When I stepped inside during the viewing, the silence was absolute. A thick, velvety absence of sound that felt almost physical. I signed the lease that afternoon. The first week was uneventful. I spent my days arranging the few possessions I'd brought, taking my medication, and sleeping whenever the tinnitus would allow. The constant high-pitched whine in my ears was maddening, but at least here, it wasn't competing with other sounds. It was on the 8th night that I first heard it. A voice, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. A whisper that somehow cut through the ringing in my ears. "Hello!" I sat up in bed, heart racing. The word hung in the darkness, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd spoken it myself. Sleep deprivation plays tricks on the mind. I switched on my bedside lamp and checked my phone. 3:17 a.m. Just the house settling, I told myself, though the rational part of my brain knew houses don't settle in words. I took an extra Ambien and eventually drifted off. The next morning, I dismissed it as a hypnagogic hallucination, those strange sensory experiences that can occur between wakefulness and sleep. My neurologist had warned me these might happen, especially with the cocktail of medications I was taking. But that night, as I lay in bed counting the water stains on the ceiling, 7, vaguely shaped like continents, I heard it again. "Can you hear me?" The voice was clearer this time, feminine, tentative, with an odd hollow quality, as if spoken into an empty bottle. I froze, muscles tensed, listening so hard it hurt. Nothing followed, just the persistent ringing in my ears and the distant tick of the grandfather clock downstairs. The next day, I inspected the house, looking for anything that might explain what I'd heard. Old heating pipes that could ping and whistle, a radio left on somewhere, a neighbor's voice carrying through the woods? Nothing. The house remained eerily silent during daylight hours. I started keeping a journal. If I was going to hallucinate, I should at least document it properly. Professional habits die hard. Day 10, voice again tonight. Asked me if I was new here. Voice definitely female, youngish. Sound doesn't match acoustics of the room, too dry, no natural reverb. Almost like it's being directly inserted into my auditory cortex rather than traveling through air. Day 11, nothing tonight. Slept through until morning for the first time in weeks. Woke feeling watched. Day 12, found a small handprint on the bathroom mirror this morning. Too small to be mine, like a child's. No children have been in this house since I moved in. Tried to take a photo, but it didn't show up in the image. When I returned from making coffee, it was gone. Day 13, voice asked me to play tonight. Definitely a child's voice. Said no aloud. Felt immediately foolish. Temperature in room dropped approximately 15 degrees for exactly 47 seconds. I counted. Tinnitus intensified to almost unbearable levels. I wasn't sleeping anymore. Not really. Just drifting in and out of consciousness. Never sure if what I was experiencing was dream or reality. The tinnitus was getting worse. A constant screaming in my ears that sometimes modulated into what sounded like distant, discordant music. I called my doctor, who adjusted my medication and suggested I might be experiencing auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find meaningful patterns in random noise. Like seeing faces in clouds, he explained, but with sound. That might have explained the voices, but not the other things. The handprints began appearing everywhere, on mirrors, windows, walls. Always small, always vanishing when I tried to document them. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. I'd place my coffee mug on the kitchen counter, turn to get the cream from the refrigerator, and turn back to find the mug on the other side of the room. At first, these displacements were subtle, easily attributed to forgetfulness. But they became more dramatic, more undeniable. I began taking photos of rooms before leaving them, just to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. On day 17, I woke to find all of my shoes arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the living room. I hadn't sleepwalked since childhood. That same day, I noticed the basement door was open. I distinctly remembered locking it after a cursory inspection when I first moved in. The basement had been dark and damp, filled with the previous tenants' abandoned junk and a musty smell that triggered my migraines. I had no reason to go down there. I closed and locked the door again. An hour later, it was open. This became our routine, me locking the door, the house, or whatever was in it. Opening it. A silent battle of wills. I began to feel like the house was testing me, gauging my reactions, learning my limits. The voice became more frequent, more insistent. Play with me. Come downstairs. Don't you want to see? I started answering it, despite knowing how crazy that would sound to anyone else. See what? I asked the empty air one night. What happened to the others? I should have left then, packed my meager belongings and fled. Breach of lease be damned. But where would I go? I had burned through my savings on medical bills, alienated friends and family during the worst of my pain, and some perverse curiosity had taken hold. The sound engineer in me wanted to capture these anomalous acoustic events to prove they existed outside my damaged brain. I set up recording equipment throughout the house, simple omnidirectional microphones connected to a digital recorder. If there were voices, I would document them, validate my sanity. The first night's recordings yielded nothing but the ambient sounds of the house. The refrigerator's hum, the occasional creak of timber contracting in the cold, the soft whistle of wind through imperfect window seals. The second night, all of my equipment was dead, batteries drained completely. I charged them fully before setting up. When I plugged the recorder into my laptop to recharge it, the device sparked and my computer crashed. The hard drive was corrupted beyond recovery. That night, the temperature in my bedroom dropped so low I could see my breath. The tinnitus escalated to a shriek, and beneath it, I heard a chorus of whispers. Not just one voice now, but many, layered atop each other like a macabre choir. She can't help you. None of them can. You're already his. I ran from the room, stumbling down the stairs in darkness. The front door wouldn't open. The knob turned, but the door itself seemed fused to the frame. Same with the back door and every window I tried. In my panic, I pulled so hard on one window that the handle snapped off in my grip. With nowhere else to go, I ended up in the kitchen, curled against the refrigerator. Its mechanical hum the only normal sound in a house that had become a trap. I must have passed out there, because the next thing I remember is waking to sunlight streaming through the windows and birds singing outside. The doors opened normally in the daylight. The windows, too, though the one with the broken handle still showed the damage from the night before. Proof that not everything had been a hallucination. I called the real estate agent that morning, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I need to know about the previous tenants, I said without preamble when she answered. Pause. I'm not sure what you mean, Ms. Kern. The people who lived in this house before me. What happened to them? Another pause, longer this time. The house has had several owners over the years. It's quite old, you know? In the last decade, the last people who lived here. I need to know why they left. She sighed, a sound that conveyed both resignation and discomfort. Look, I'm not supposed to discuss this, but since you're already living there, there was an incident. A family, the Rosenthals. They had a little girl about 6. She went missing. They found her days later in the basement, hidden in an old trunk. The medical examiner ruled it an accident, children playing hide and seek, that sort of thing. But the parents, well, they claimed the house took her. That she'd been talking about a friend no one else could see. My blood turned to ice. When was this? 3 years ago. The house has been vacant since. We've had trouble keeping tenants. People complain about strange noises, cold spots. One man stayed only a single night before breaking his lease. Said he heard a child crying in the walls. I thanked her mechanically and hung up. The basement door stood open again, a dark rectangle in my peripheral vision. I should have left. Instead, I went to the hardware store and bought a padlock. That night, I locked the basement door with my new purchase, then pushed a heavy bookcase in front of it for good measure. I swallowed 2 sleeping pills and barricaded myself in the bedroom, a chair wedged under the doorknob. The whispers started earlier than usual, around midnight. She's hiding from us. She locked the door. He doesn't like that. He's coming for her now. I had brought a digital recorder to bed with me, a small handheld one I used for work, different from the equipment that had been destroyed. I switched it on, my hands trembling. Who is he? I asked the darkness. The temperature plummeted instantly. My breath clouded in front of my face, and the ringing in my ears intensified until I thought my head would split open. Then, abruptly, the tinnitus stopped. Complete silence, the first I had experienced since the accident. In that uncanny silence, a new voice spoke, directly beside my ear. The collector. The voice was unlike the others, deep, resonant, with a strange multitonal quality, as if several voices were speaking in perfect unison. It wasn't threatening, exactly, but it carried an undeniable authority that made me want to curl into myself and disappear. What does he collect? I whispered, not sure if I really wanted an answer. Echoes.
Moments.
The sounds people make when they realize they're never leaving. Something cold brushed against my cheek. Not a hand, but something less defined, like walking through a spider's web made of ice. Your fear has such a beautiful timbre. The chair under my doorknob began to rattle violently, then splinter. I clutched the recorder to my chest, as if it might somehow protect me. The door burst open, but no one was there. Just the dark hallway beyond and, distantly, the sound of wood scraping against wood. The bookcase being moved. I was frozen in place, unable to run, unable even to scream. The temperature continued to drop until my teeth chattered uncontrollably. Then I heard it, the metallic snap of the padlock breaking, the creak of the basement door opening wider, and a soft, sing-song voice that seemed to rise up the stairs. Come see. Come see. I've been waiting for so long. What happened next defies rational explanation. I felt something take hold of me. Not physically, but a kind of pressure in my mind, a compulsion that overrode my terror. I found myself standing, moving woodenly toward the door, the recorder still clutched in my rigid fingers. My body wasn't my own. Each step was an act of something else's will. I fought it, trying to regain control of my limbs, but I might as well have been trying to stop the Earth's rotation. I watched in helpless horror as my feet carried me down the hallway, down the stairs, across the living room floor strewn with the books from the toppled bookcase. The basement door gaped like a mouth, a rectangle of perfect darkness. Against my will, I began to descend the basement stairs. The smell hit me first, the moldy dampness I remembered, but underneath it something worse, something sweet and putrid. At the bottom of the stairs, my flashlight, which I had apparently grabbed at some point, revealed the basement I remembered. Concrete floors, stone foundation walls, abandoned furniture draped in sheets. But now there was something else. A large antique trunk sat in the center of the room, its brass fittings gleaming dully in the flashlight beam. The same trunk where they had found the little girl. Open it. The chorus of voices urged from all around me. He wants you to see his collection. My body moved forward, though everything in my mind screamed to run. I knelt before the trunk, my hands reaching for the latch. Inside was not what I expected. Not a child's remains or some grotesque tableau. Instead, the trunk was filled with what looked like old recording equipment, wax cylinders, vinyl records, reel-to-reel tapes, cassettes, CDs, digital memory cards, arranged in neat chronological order. Each was meticulously labeled with dates spanning more than a century. Every voice that ever screamed within these walls. The deep, multitonal voice explained from just behind me. Every plea, every final breath, preserved forever. I turned slowly against my will. He stood taller than should have been possible in the low-ceilinged basement, a figure of dense shadow with only the suggestion of a human form. Where a face should have been was a void darker than the surrounding darkness. Around him, like satellites orbiting a black hole, floated translucent shapes, human figures, distorted as if viewed through running water. The little girl was among them, her face locked in an eternal expression of surprise. "You're different from the others," the collector said, the words seeming to vibrate through my bones rather than enter through my ears. "You understand sound, its power, its permanence. Please," I managed to whisper, finding my voice at last. "Let me go." "But you've only just arrived," he said, and I could hear amusement in that terrible voice. "And I've been waiting for someone like you, someone who can appreciate my work." He gestured to the trunk full of recordings. All those lives, all those deaths, captured forever, but incomplete. "I need someone with your expertise to help me perfect my collection." One of the ghostly figures drifted closer, a woman in clothing that looked to be from the early 1900s, her mouth open in a silent scream. "I can take away your pain," the collector continued, "the constant noise in your head. I can replace it with perfect silence. All you have to do is stay. Help me record the next voices for my collection." The offer was tempting in a way I'm ashamed to admit. After months of the relentless screaming in my ears, the prospect of silence was almost irresistible. And some detached, clinical part of my mind was fascinated by what I was seeing. Proof that death wasn't the end, that sound could be preserved beyond the physical realm. But then I thought of the little girl, trapped in this basement for eternity, and the others floating around me, their faces frozen in moments of ultimate terror. "No," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "I won't help you." The temperature dropped even further, frost crystallizing on the concrete floor. "You misunderstand," the collector said, the multiple voices in his speech separating slightly so that I could distinguish individual tones of rage, hunger, and cold amusement. "It wasn't a request." The ghostly figures began to circle me faster, their movements creating a wind that shouldn't have been possible. The little girl's spectral hand reached out toward me, her lips forming words I couldn't hear. I clutched my recorder tighter, a useless talisman against forces I couldn't comprehend. And then, in a moment of desperate inspiration, I pressed play on a recording I had made earlier that day, a simple test of the device's functionality. My own voice emerged from the tiny speaker, reciting an engineering poem I used to calm my nerves before difficult recording sessions. Sound waves travel through the air, pressure changes everywhere, molecules bump and push and shove, energy flowing from above. It was nothing special, just a mnemonic device for remembering the physical properties of sound. But the effect was immediate and shocking. The collector recoiled as if struck, the shadowy mass of his form rippling like disturbed water. The ghosts scattered, retreating to the corners of the basement. In that moment of confusion, I felt the compulsion holding me in place weaken. I didn't hesitate. I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, the recorder still blaring my recorded voice behind me. I made it to the main floor and rushed toward the front door, half expecting it to be sealed shut again. To my surprise, it opened easily, and I burst out into the cold night air. I ran until my lungs burned, not stopping until I reached the main road. A passing trucker took pity on me, a wild-eyed woman in pajamas clutching a digital recorder, and drove me to the nearest motel. I never returned to the house on Larkspur Lane, not even for my belongings. I called the real estate agent the next day and told her I was breaking the lease. She didn't argue. That was 6 months ago. I've been staying with my sister since then, trying to piece my life back together. The tinnitus is still there, but it's different now. Sometimes, beneath the ringing, I can hear whispers, fragments of voices that shouldn't be there. Last week, I finally worked up the courage to listen to the recording from that night. Most of it is what you'd expect. My own frightened breathing, the creak of floorboards, the ambient sounds of an old house at night. But in the moments before I fled, when I was in the basement facing the collector, there's something else. Behind my recitation of the engineering poem, barely audible even when I boost the signal, are dozens of voices speaking in unison. "Take me with you." I've analyzed the recording using every tool at my disposal. The voices exist at frequencies that shouldn't be audible to human ears, yet somehow they registered on my device. And layered beneath them, at the very threshold of perception, is another sound. A deep, resonant tone that makes me nauseous when I isolate it. It's the voice of the collector, and it's speaking my name. Yesterday, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address written on it. A different house in a different state. Below the address, in handwriting so precise it looked almost mechanical, were the words, "The acoustics here are perfect for your particular voice. He's waiting for the next addition to his collection." I burned the letter, but I can't burn the knowledge that he's still out there, still collecting, and that somehow he's found a way to reach beyond the walls of that house. The doctors don't believe me, of course. They've diagnosed me with PTSD, auditory hallucinations, paranoid ideation. They've increased my medication, but I know what I experienced. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night when the tinnitus subsides momentarily, I can hear the little girl's voice, warning me. He never lets go of what belongs to him, and now he has your echo. I'm writing this not because I expect to be believed, but as a warning. If you ever find yourself drawn to a too quiet house, if you ever hear whispers that cut through other sounds, if doors open themselves and the cold descends without reason, run. Don't look back. Don't listen to the voices. And if you hear your own voice played back to you when you're alone, it's already too late. You're part of his collection now. My name is Eliza Kern, and this is my confession. I don't know how much longer I have before he finds me again. The tinnitus is changing, becoming more harmonic, almost musical. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can see the trunk in the basement, lid open, waiting for one more recording. A space labeled with my name. I never told anyone what happened that autumn. Not the therapist my sister insisted I see. Not the detectives who kept pushing for what really occurred in that house. Not even my own mother, who still calls every week to check if I'm doing better. How could I? The truth sounds like the ravings of a lunatic, the kind of person who belongs in an institution, not walking freely among the rational world. But I need to write this down now. My hands shake as I type these words. The doctors say I have 6 months, maybe less. Brain cancer. Inoperable. The headache started 3 weeks ago, and now the irony isn't lost on me. For years, I convinced myself I was going insane, that my mind was fracturing, and now it literally is, invaded by something physical, measurable, real. Something the doctors can point to on a scan and say, "There it is. That's what's wrong with you." If only they could have done that 7 years ago in that house on Blackwood Lane. I was never supposed to be there in the first place. My career as an architectural photographer had been gaining momentum, with galleries in Portland and Seattle beginning to show interest in my work. I specialized in abandoned buildings, the more decrepit and forgotten, the better. I loved capturing the way nature slowly reclaimed human spaces, the stories told in peeling wallpaper and sagging floorboards. There's something poetic about decay, about the inevitable return to dust. Then the economy crashed. Galleries closed. Commissions dried up. By April, I was 3 months behind on rent and facing eviction from my apartment in Seattle. That's when Uncle Richard died. We weren't close. He was my mother's older brother, a reclusive academic who'd retired from teaching comparative literature at some small college in Vermont. I'd met him perhaps 3 times in my life, the last when I was 14. I remembered a tall, stooped man who smelled of pipe tobacco and rarely spoke except to correct someone's grammar. His attorney contacted me. Apparently, Uncle Richard had no one else. No wife, no children, no friends close enough to inherit. Just a distant niece he'd barely known. He left me everything, which wasn't much except for a house in northern Vermont. A 3-story Victorian built in 1888, set on 5 acres of wooded land outside a town called Millfield that barely registered on maps. It needs work, the attorney warned during our video call, his voice tinny through my laptop speakers. Richard wasn't much for maintenance in his later years, but it's paid off. No mortgage, just property taxes and utilities. I stared at the grainy photos he'd emailed. The house looked like something from a Gothic novel. Asymmetrical with a turret on one side, wraparound porch, gingerbread trim badly in need of paint. Windows like vacant eyes. Even through poor quality images, I could see it was exactly the kind of place I'd have paid to photograph. "I'll take it," I said, not fully comprehending what I was agreeing to. In my mind, it was simple. Sell the house, use the money to restart my life in Seattle. But checking real estate listings in the area revealed a depressing truth. Houses in Millfield stayed on the market for years, selling far below asking price if they sold at all. So I decided to live there temporarily. Fix it up enough to sell, photograph the process for a potential exhibition, reclamation, or something equally pretentious. My life in Seattle had imploded anyway. What did I have to lose? I arrived in early September. The real estate photos hadn't done the place justice, either in capturing its former grandeur or its current state of neglect. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously on the western side. Shutters hung askew or were missing entirely. The once white paint had yellowed to the color of nicotine stains, peeling away in long strips like sunburned skin. But it was mine, all mine. 3 stories, 8 bedrooms, a library, sitting rooms, and God knows what else, all to myself. For someone who'd spent the last 5 years in a 600 square foot apartment, the space felt infinite. The first night, I slept on a camping mattress in what I assumed had been Uncle Richard's bedroom, the only room that looked recently inhabited. The rest of the house had an untouched quality, as if preserved from another era. Heavy Victorian furniture draped in sheets, faded wallpaper, ornate light fixtures converted from gas to electric decades ago. I fell asleep to the sound of wind in the eaves and woke to knocking. 3 distinct knocks, like someone rapping their knuckles against wood. Not the front door, it came from inside the room. I sat up, heart pounding, eyes adjusting to darkness broken only by moonlight filtering through lace curtains. Knock, 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 from the closet. I'd left my phone charging across the room. No weapon, no way to call for help. The house sat half a mile from its nearest neighbor. "Hello!" My voice emerged as a whisper. The knocking stopped. I waited, counting my heartbeats, then fumbled for the bedside lamp. The light revealed an empty room. Nothing unusual, nothing disturbed. I crossed to the closet, breath held, and yanked the door open. Empty hangers rattled. A few of Uncle Richard's tweed jackets and button-down shirts hung limply. Nothing else. Old house, I told myself. Settling noises. But I didn't sleep again that night. The next few days passed in a blur of mundane activity. I unpacked my meager belongings, bought groceries in town, began assessing what needed fixing first. The electricity worked, though many outlets looked dangerously outdated. The plumbing functioned with occasional protests of knocking pipes. The landline, yes, the house still had one, worked intermittently, the connection cutting in and out mid-sentence. Cell service was non-existent, which didn't surprise me given the rural location and dense trees surrounding the property. Internet existed via a painfully slow DSL connection that Uncle Richard had apparently used solely for email. I told myself this isolation was good. Fewer distractions. Time to focus on house repairs and photography. I set up my equipment and began documenting the house. The grand central staircase with its carved banister, the stained glass window on the landing, the library with floor-to-ceiling shelves. That's where I found the journals. Uncle Richard had kept detailed diaries for decades, it seemed. Leather-bound volumes filled with dense, spidery handwriting. I opened one at random, expecting accounts of academic life or perhaps gardening notes. Instead, I read, October 15th, 2008. It's back. After months of silence, the knocking resumed last night. 3 distinct raps from within the walls of the upstairs study. When I called out, it stopped, only to begin again in the bedroom closet an hour later. I know what Jensen would say, old pipes, house settling, or rodents in the walls. He's wrong. There's agency in these sounds. Intent. I sense it watching me. I dropped the journal as if it had burned me. This had to be fiction, I reasoned. Uncle Richard writing some Gothic novel in his retirement. Yet when I picked it up again and flipped through other entries, they read as personal accounts. interspersed with mundane details about grocery shopping or faculty politics from his teaching days. I checked other volumes. Most contained ordinary daily observations, but every so often, entries like the one I'd found appeared. References to knocking, to footsteps overhead when he knew he was alone, to objects moved from where he'd left them, and increasingly to something watching him. My skin prickled as I recalled the knocking from my first night. Coincidence, surely. I'd been overtired, stressed from travel. And old houses made noises, everyone knew that. I replaced the journals and decided to focus on practical matters. The kitchen needed immediate attention. Ancient appliances peeling linoleum, cabinets barely hanging on their hinges. I made a detailed list of repairs and supplies, then drove into town. Millfield proved to be exactly what I'd expected. A small New England town that had seen better days. A single main street with brick buildings, half the storefronts empty or housing oddly specific businesses that couldn't possibly turn a profit. A shop selling only buttons, another specializing in hand-carved wooden birds. The hardware store at least seemed reasonably stocked. The owner, a weathered man in his 60s named Paul, perked up when I mentioned Blackwood Lane. Richard's place? You're his niece, then? News traveled fast in small towns. That's right. Just moved in. Quite a house. He rang up my purchases, wood filler, sandpaper, paint. Been in the family long? I don't actually know. Uncle Richard and I weren't close. Paul nodded as if this explained something. Not surprised. He kept to himself, especially these last few years. He paused, then added with careful neutrality. House that size must be hard to maintain alone. It needs work, I agreed. You planning to stay long term? Just until I can fix it up enough to sell. Something flickered across Paul's face. Relief? Well, let me know if you need recommendations for contractors. Some projects you won't want to tackle yourself. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Miss? Wiring. I'd get the wiring checked first thing. Old houses like that can be fire hazards. I thanked him and left, unsettled without knowing exactly why. That evening, I began work on the kitchen cabinets, removing damaged doors and sanding down rough edges. The physical labor felt good after weeks of anxiety and uncertainty. I worked until my shoulders ached, then heated a can of soup on the ancient stove and took it to the library to eat while examining more of Uncle Richard's journals. I told myself I was looking for information about the house, when certain repairs had been made, issues to watch for. But truthfully, I was hunting for more entries like the one I'd found earlier. Something about its matter-of-fact description of impossible things tugged at me. I found what I was looking for in a journal from 2010. March 3rd, 2010. 3 months since my last entry. The medication helped for a while, or I convinced myself it did. No more knocking. No more footsteps. I began to believe Dr. Harrison was right about stress-induced hallucinations. Then last night, I woke at precisely 3:17 a.m. according to the bedside clock. Something had changed in the room. The air felt charged, as if before a lightning strike. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. I lay perfectly still, eyes closed, pretending sleep while every nerve screamed danger. Something stood beside my bed. I couldn't see it, wouldn't see it, but I felt its presence as surely as I've ever felt anything. A weight to the air where it stood. I kept my breathing slow and regular through sheer force of will. It remained there for 27 minutes. I counted every second. Then, as suddenly as I'd sensed its arrival, it was gone. The air returned to normal. The oppressive cold lifted. I know how this sounds. I'm a rational man. I taught Enlightenment literature for God's sake. But I know what I experienced. It's watching me, learning me, and I fear, God help me, it's waiting for something. I closed the journal, a chill running through me despite the warmth of the room. Uncle Richard had clearly been unwell in his later years. Perhaps early dementia or some other condition that caused hallucinations. That would explain the bizarre entries mixed with otherwise lucid writing. Yet the knocking in my first night, coincidence? I said aloud, my voice startlingly loud in the quiet house. Old pipes, old wiring, old everything. I went to bed determined to be rational, but slept with the bedside lamp on anyway. The next day passed uneventfully. I continued work on the kitchen, removing the ancient linoleum to reveal wide pine floorboards beneath. They would need refinishing but were in surprisingly good condition. Small victories. That night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. I know the time because I checked my phone the instant I opened my eyes. Heart already racing, though I couldn't say why. The room felt wrong. The air had changed, grown dense somehow, like the pressure before a storm. Cold, so cold my breath should have fogged. Yet it didn't. Something was different about the shadows. They seemed too solid, too intentional. Particularly the darkness in the far corner of the room, near the closet. It appeared deeper than it should be, as if the corner receded farther than the dimensions of the room allowed. I lay motionless, suddenly certain that any movement would attract attention. Attention from what my rational mind couldn't say, but some older, animal part of my brain understood perfectly. Prey instinct. Don't move. Don't draw its notice. Time stretched. My muscles cramped from holding still. My eyes burned from staring at that too dark corner without blinking. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, the wrongness lifted. The air returned to normal temperature. The shadows resumed their proper dimensions. Whatever presence I'd sensed or imagined was gone. I told myself it was a dream. Sleep paralysis. Stress from the move combined with reading Uncle Richard's disturbing journals before bed. I'd practically programmed myself to wake at 3:17 and imagine something in the room. But I knew. Even as I rationalized, I knew. When morning came, I drove into town and bought a carbon monoxide detector. The hardware store didn't have any in stock. Paul had to order one from their distributor in Burlington. Any particular reason you're worried about CO? He asked as he processed my payment. I considered lying but opted for a partial truth. I've been having some vivid dreams since moving in. Just want to rule out environmental causes. He nodded thoughtfully. Richard mentioned something similar once. Thought he was being watched at night. He must have seen something in my expression because he quickly added, "Old houses play tricks on the mind. All those empty rooms, strange noises." Exactly, I agreed too eagerly. Just being cautious. When I returned home, I found something I couldn't explain away. All the cabinet doors I'd removed and carefully stacked in the dining room had been returned to their hinges. Not just set back in place. Properly reattached with their original hardware, which I'd placed in a labeled Ziploc bag on the counter. I stood in the kitchen doorway staring. Had I done this myself and forgotten? No, impossible. I'd spent hours removing those doors. I wouldn't have replaced them, undoing my own work. And I certainly wouldn't have forgotten doing so. Someone had been in the house while I was gone. I checked the doors and windows, all locked from the inside. Nothing disturbed or missing, quite the opposite. Things had been fixed, put back in order. I might have preferred signs of an ordinary break-in. At least that would make sense. I called the local police on the landline, which thankfully was working. The officer who responded, a young woman named Deputy Collins, walked through the house with me but found no signs of forced entry. Could it have been a neighbor? She suggested. Someone with a key who knew Richard and wanted to help out? Without introducing themselves? Without asking if I wanted help? She conceded the point. Well, keep your doors locked. Call again if anything else happens. The carbon monoxide detector arrived the next day. I installed it immediately, but it never once alarmed. Whatever was happening, it wasn't gas-induced hallucination. The knocking began again that night. Not from the closet this time, but from inside the wall beside my bed. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. I switched on the lamp and placed my hand against the wallpaper. The third time it happened, I felt it, a vibration against my palm, as if someone had wrapped their knuckles directly against the other side of the wall. "What do you want?" I whispered. The response came instantly. 3 more knocks, louder than before. I jerked my hand away. This was real. Whatever it was, I wasn't imagining it, wasn't dreaming it. The next day, I took a hammer to the wall. I told myself I was looking for plumbing issues, electrical problems, rodent infestations, anything to explain the knocking. I made a hole the size of my fist and shone a flashlight inside. Nothing but dust, insulation, and the interface of the exterior clapboards. No pipes, no wires, no evidence of animals. I patched the hole as best I could, but the knocking continued each night, moving around the room. Sometimes from the walls, sometimes the closet, once from directly beneath my bed. Always in threes. Sometimes it would respond when I spoke, other times it continued its pattern regardless of what I said or did. I began avoiding the bedroom. I slept on the sofa in the library, surrounded by Uncle Richard's journals. I read them systematically now, looking for patterns, explanations, anything that might help me understand what was happening. Richard had experienced the same phenomena. First knocking, then a sense of being watched, pressure changes, cold spots. Later entries described objects moving when he wasn't looking. Electronics malfunctioning. Whispers just at the edge of hearing. And it had escalated. April 22nd, 2013. I saw it today. Not directly. I still cannot make myself look at it head-on. But in the mirror as I passed the upstairs bathroom. A figure at the end of the hall, tall and wrong in proportions. Not human, though it stood on two legs. Just for an instant before I instinctively turned. Of course, when I looked properly, the hallway was empty. It wants me to see it. It's getting stronger, more capable of manifesting physically. The knocking is constant now, no longer just at night. It follows me through the house, door to door, room to room. Knock, 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 like it's asking for permission to enter. I will not invite it in. I know that much from my research. Whatever it is, it needs permission. Some threshold law that even such entities must obey. By this point in my reading, I no longer doubted Uncle Richard's accounts. How could I, when I was experiencing the same phenomena? The question now was what to do about it. The journals offered few solutions. Richard had tried religious rituals from various traditions, consulted so-called experts in the paranormal, even attempted technological approaches, EVP recordings, motion-activated cameras. Nothing had worked. If anything, his attention seemed to have strengthened whatever presence occupied the house. I considered leaving, abandoning the house and everything in it. But financial reality hadn't changed. I had nowhere else to go, no resources to start over yet again. And something else kept me there. A growing obsession with understanding what was happening. With seeing for myself what Uncle Richard had glimpsed in the mirror. Rational or not, I needed to know. As September gave way to October, the presence grew bolder. The knocking followed me from room to room as Richard had described. Objects disappeared, then reappeared in strange places. My hairbrush in the refrigerator, keys in the bathtub, a coffee mug balanced precariously on top of a door. The electricity became increasingly unreliable. Lights flickered constantly. Appliances turned themselves on and off. My camera's battery drained within minutes of being fully charged, making my documentation project nearly impossible. I saw movement in my peripheral vision, a dark shape darting through doorways, a tall figure at the end of hallways that disappeared when I turned my head. Once, a face in a window, not reflected from outside, but looking in from what should have been empty air 2 stories above ground. I began talking to it, not because I'd lost my mind, though that remained a possibility I couldn't entirely dismiss, but because the silence had become unbearable. "What do you want?" I asked repeatedly. "Why are you here? Why me?" The knocking would respond, but never in a way I could interpret as language. Just the same 3 knocks, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes so loud they seemed to vibrate the entire house. I searched the journals for clues about the entity's origin. Had it been in the house when Richard moved in? Had he somehow called it forth? But the early journals contained no mention of supernatural occurrences. Those only began in 2008, after Richard had lived in the house for decades. What had changed? The answer came from an unexpected source. While cleaning out a desk in the study, I found a bundle of letters from a colleague of Richard's named Thomas Jensen, the same Jensen mentioned in the journal entry about knocking. Most were mundane academic correspondence, but one from 2008 caught my attention. Richard, While I understand your excitement about the historical significance of your discovery during the renovation, I must caution against further disturbance of the site. The hidden room you've uncovered behind the library wall may indeed date to the house's original construction, but without proper archaeological supervision, valuable context could be lost. As for the artifacts you described, the symbols etched into the floor and the small stone container, I strongly advise leaving these untouched until an expert can examine them. My knowledge of pre-colonial New England folk practices is limited, but what you've described suggests possible ritualistic purpose. Your theory about the original owner's involvement in unorthodox spiritual practices may have merit, but jumping to conclusions about summoning circles and containment vessels strays dangerously close to the kind of Gothic sensationalism we critique in our students' analyses of Hawthorne. I'll make inquiries with the anthropology department about resources for proper examination of your find. In the meantime, I urge caution and, frankly, skepticism about supernatural interpretations. With concern, Thomas, a hidden room, behind the library wall. My heart raced as connections formed. The knocking had started in 2008, after Richard discovered something during renovations. Something sealed away that perhaps should have remained so. I examined the library with new purpose, looking for signs of recent construction. The wall in question wasn't difficult to identify. It had subtly different baseboard molding than the others, slightly newer-looking plaster. I tapped along the wall, listening for hollow spots. About halfway across, the sound changed. I pressed harder, and to my shock, a section of wall swung inward. A hidden door disguised as part of the wall itself, with no visible handle or hinges from the outside. Cold air rushed out, carrying a musty odor of enclosed space and something else. An acrid, unpleasant smell I couldn't identify. I retrieved a flashlight from the kitchen and, against all my instincts screaming danger, stepped through the doorway. The hidden space was small, perhaps 8 feet square. No windows, no other doors. The walls were bare stone foundation rather than finished plaster like the rest of the house, suggesting this space predated later renovations. My flashlight beam revealed exactly what Jensen's letter had described. A circle of symbols carved into the stone floor, surrounding a small stone container about the size of a shoebox. The container's lid was off, placed carefully beside it. Empty. Whatever had been inside, whatever had been contained, was gone. I knelt to examine the symbols. They weren't from any language I recognized, but they had a definite pattern, a deliberate arrangement. Some intuitive part of me understood their purpose without knowing their meaning. Containment, binding, sealing. Uncle Richard had opened something that had been locked away. Now it moved freely through the house, through the walls, knocking, always knocking. As if triggered by my realization, 3 loud knocks reverberated from directly behind me, from the open door leading back to the library. I whirled, flashlight beam cutting through dust-filled air. The doorway was empty, but as I watched, the heavy hidden door began to swing closed, apparently of its own accord. I lunged forward but was too late. It closed with a decisive click that echoed in the small stone room. Trapped. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, though I knew no one could hear me. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then went out entirely, plunging me into absolute darkness. And in that darkness, I realized I was not alone. The air changed, that now familiar pressure drop, the sudden cold that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Something shared the space with me, something that had been contained here once and now returned by choice. I backed against the wall, pressing myself flat against cold stone. "What do you want?" My voice emerged as a whisper. 3 knocks answered. Not from the door or walls this time, but from directly in front of me, as if something stood inches away, knocking on an invisible barrier between us. Then, for the first time, it spoke. Permission. The voice was wrong, multi-toned, as if several voices spoke in imperfect unison. It came from everywhere and nowhere in the darkened room. Permission for what? I managed to ask. To enter. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest. You're already here. You've been in this house for years. Not the house. The temperature dropped further. I could see my breath now, illuminated by a faint, sourceless glow that had begun to fill the room. You. Understanding crashed over me. It wanted inside me. Possession, occupation, whatever you might call it. The entity wanted my body. Never, I whispered. The glow intensified, taking shape before me. What I saw, what it allowed me to see of itself, defied description. A form both solid and insubstantial. Features that shifted and changed even as I tried to focus on them. Height that seemed to vary from moment to moment, sometimes towering to the ceiling, sometimes shrinking to child size. Only its eyes remained constant. Black voids that reflected no light, set in what approximated a face. You will, it said, its shifting form moving closer. They all do, eventually. Richard didn't, I countered, thinking of his journals that continued until just months before his death. He had never mentioned possession. A sound emerged from the entity that might have been laughter. Richard fought. Decades of resistance. But in the end, he invited me in. His form rippled, features rearranging. For just an instant, I saw Uncle Richard's face superimposed over the shifting visage. His heart was failing. He feared death more than he feared me. A moment of weakness was all it took. Horror flooded through me. You were in him when he died? I was him when he died. I wore his flesh, felt his final heartbeat. Another ripple, and Richard's features disappeared back into the chaotic mass. But death releases us. I needed a new vessel, and here you are, blood of his blood, in his house, opening doors best left closed. It reached for me with a limb that was not quite an arm, fingers that were not quite fingers. Where it touched my shoulder, intense cold burned through my clothing. I don't need your permission freely given, it said, its voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the room. Only permission. Fear can prompt it. Pain can force it. Isolation can nurture it. The knot fingers tightened, and pain lanced through my shoulder. You will invite me in. Tonight. Tomorrow. Eventually. No, I gasped through the pain. I'll die first. Perhaps. It released me, drifting backward. But not yet. First, you'll experience what Richard did. Years of knocking, years of watching, years of never feeling alone, never feeling safe. Until invitation becomes relief. The stone door swung open behind me, light from the library spilling into the hidden room. I didn't hesitate. I ran through the doorway and slammed it shut behind me. No lock existed on this side either, but I dragged a heavy bookcase in front of the hidden door, as if it mattered. As if physical barriers meant anything now. That was 6 years ago. I've moved 4 times since I fled that house, leaving most of my possessions behind. I sold the property at a significant loss to a developer who planned to tear it down and build vacation homes on the land. I didn't warn him. I didn't tell him to leave the hidden room sealed. I told myself it was attached to the house, that destroying the building would end its influence. I almost believed it. For a while, life improved. No knocking, no watching. I rebuilt my photography career, specializing now in well-lit, populated urban landscapes. No more abandoned buildings, no more empty spaces. But it found me again. 3 months ago, the knocking resumed. 3 distinct raps from inside my bedroom wall in my Portland apartment. It followed the same progression. First knocking, then the sense of being watched, then objects moving when I turned my back. 2 weeks after the knocking started, I began experiencing headaches. When scans revealed the tumor, part of me felt vindicated. See? A medical explanation. Nothing supernatural at all. Except I know better. I know what's happening. The thing from Blackwood Lane has been patient, persistent. It's created its own invitation, a physical space inside my brain where it can enter. As the tumor grows, as my defenses weaken, it draws closer. Last night, I woke at exactly 3:17 a.m. It stood beside my bed, more solid than I'd ever seen it, its features momentarily settling into something almost human, almost familiar. Soon, it said. It didn't knock anymore. It didn't need to. I'm writing this as a warning, though I don't know who will read it or what good it will do. If you find yourself in a house where the walls knock back at you, leave immediately. If you discover hidden rooms sealed away by previous generations, respect their reasons. Some things are contained for a purpose. My time grows short. The headaches are constant now. The doctors have me on pain medication that barely touches it. My vision blurs. My thoughts scatter. Sometimes, in moments of weakness, I consider the entity's offer. Would possession be worse than this slow deterioration? Would surrendering my autonomy be so terrible if it ended the pain? 3 knocks from the wall beside me, as if it hears my thoughts, as if it knows I'm weakening. I won't invite it in, not knowingly, not willingly, but I fear what might happen when the pain becomes too much, when my mind fractures further. What words might escape me in delirium that could be construed as permission? It's patient, it's persistent, and it knows I'm running out of time. If you're reading this, I'm already gone, one way or another, and something else wears my face, speaks with my voice, something that knocks from within. Knock, knock, knock. Do you hear it?